My name is Nicole, and I am 32 years old. I was the ugly high school graduate, the ultimate disappointment. The daughter my family of elite doctors threw into the freezing Boston snow exactly 10 years ago, warning me to never use their prestigious last name again. So when I walked into my sister's lavish Hamptons wedding a decade later, the reactions were exactly what you would expect. My mother dropped her vintage champagne and demanded to know why a defect was ruining her perfect aesthetic. My sister screamed for security to throw the uninvited trash out immediately. And her powerful, brilliant groom, he took one look at me, dropped his bride's hand, and delivered a reality check that shattered their entire high society world in a matter of seconds. I just smiled because they had absolutely no idea who they were really dealing with. Before I dive into exactly how I dismantled my toxic family's empire on their most important day, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And if you have ever been thrown away by your own blood simply because you refuse to fit into their suffocating mold, hit that like and subscribe button. You are going to want to hear every single detail of how I turned their greatest triumph into absolute undeniable ruin. The Hamptons in mid-June is exactly what you would expect it to be. The coastal air smells heavily of expensive custom perfumed sea salt and generations of old money. The sun was setting over the private beach, casting a golden glow over the massive estate. I walked across the perfectly manicured lawn of the Ocean View estate, feeling the soft gravel crunch steadily beneath my designer heels. I was not wearing anything flashy or ostentatious. There were no giant logos screaming for attention, no blinding diamonds meant to prove my worth to a crowd of strangers. I wore a perfectly tailored emerald green dress that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. It was the kind of quiet luxury that only true power affords. But as I navigated through the sea of renowned doctors, elite surgeons, and medical socialites, I knew I was walking straight into a hostile minefield. I had not seen my parents or my younger sister in exactly 10 years. 10 years of absolute suffocating silence. 10 years since they threw me out of our house with nothing but a single battered suitcase and a shattered sense of self-worth. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the ocean breeze fill my lungs. I needed to center myself before the inevitable chaos erupted. The string quartet was playing a soft classical melody near the massive floral archway where the ceremony would soon take place. Waiters in crisp white uniforms glided effortlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of caviar and champagne. It was a picture-perfect display of the ultimate medical society wedding. And I was the one element that did not belong in their carefully curated image. Watch where you are stepping, because this grass is worth more than your entire life. The voice cut through the soft music and the polite chatter like a jagged blade. It sent a sudden chill down my spine despite the warm summer weather. I did not even have to turn around to know who it belonged to. The sheer venom in that tone was a physical force I had memorized during my childhood. It was my mother, Catherine. At 60 years old, she still looked exactly like she had stepped out of a medical lifestyle magazine. Her face was pulled tight, her eyes were razor sharp, and her entire posture was built on the foundation of looking down at everyone else around her. I turned around slowly, meeting her furious gaze without a single flinch. Catherine froze the crystal champagne glass in her hand tilted sideways, spilling the expensive vintage drink all over the immaculate green lawn and splashing onto her designer shoes. Nicole, she gasped. Her eyes widened in a visceral mixture of absolute horror and profound disgust. She quickly looked around in a panic, terrified that one of her wealthy surgeon friends might have noticed my presence. "What in God's name are you doing here? Why is this defect here?" "Hello, Mother," I said calmly. "It has been a long time." My voice was completely devoid of the trembling fear I used to carry around her. "Do not you dare mother me," she hissed, taking a step closer so she could drop her voice into a toxic whisper. "Are you completely out of your mind? You show up here looking like some cheap office worker at the biggest medical society wedding of the decade. How did you even get past the front gate? Did you sneak in with the catering staff or jump the fence?" I did not step back. I just looked at her, analyzing the panic sweating through her perfectly applied makeup. 10 years ago, those exact words would have sent me into an immediate spiral of panic and tears. I would have begged for her forgiveness and tried to make myself as small as possible. Today, her insults just sounded desperate and pathetic. I walked through the front gate. Catherine, I replied, maintaining direct eye contact. I walked through the front door just like any other guest. A guest, she let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sounded like breaking glass. You, a college dropout, an ugly failure, who could not even pass the medical college admission test. William is going to have a massive stroke when he sees you standing here. We told everyone in our circle that you were doing charity work in some dangerous third world country just to cover up the endless embarrassment of your existence. Our friends believe you dedicated your pathetic life to serving the poor because telling them you dropped out would ruin your father's spotless reputation. You need to leave, right now, before Ashley sees you and has her special day ruined by your pathetic attempt to beg for money. I know exactly why you came crawling back today. You saw the venue and thought you could squeeze us for cash. You are a disgrace to this family and you always will be. You have exactly 1 minute to get off this property before I personally drag you out. I simply smiled calmly at her pathetic and empty threat. Before my mother could summon the breath to launch into another vicious tirade, a sudden murmur rippled through the crowd behind her. The soft classical music playing from the string quartet seemed to fade into the background as guests turned their heads. The bride was making her entrance. Ashley pushed her way through the cluster of elite medical professionals moving with a frantic, aggressive energy that completely ruined her elegant bridal facade. At 28 years old, my younger sister was the undisputed golden child of our family. She was a newly minted, highly publicized dermatologist, marrying into another incredibly prestigious medical circle, and she carried herself like absolute royalty. She was wearing a custom-tailored silk wedding gown that cascaded over the perfectly manicured grass. It was a dress designed to demand attention and project superiority. Her hair was styled in an immaculate updo, and diamonds sparkled at her throat. But the moment her eyes locked onto me, her picture-perfect camera-ready smile violently twisted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered revulsion. She looked at me the exact same way you would look at a piece of garbage that had mysteriously blown onto a pristine dining table. The sheer panic in her eyes was almost comical. "What is she doing here?" Ashley demanded, her voice shrill and echoing loudly across the sudden silence of the garden. She stepped back instinctively, pulling her silk skirt away, as if my mere presence was a highly contagious disease. "I am handling it, sweetheart," Catherine said immediately. My mother shifted instantly into her fiercely protective golden child defense mode. She stepped between Ashley and me, glaring at me with eyes full of absolute hatred. She was just leaving. "I asked what you are doing at my wedding," Nicole Ashley snapped, ignoring our mother. Her voice rose even higher, entirely abandoning any pretense of high society manners. Several nearby guests holding crystal champagne flutes stopped their conversations entirely to watch the drama unfold. The whispers began to spread among the hospital board members and wealthy surgeons standing nearby. "Did you run out of money?" Ashley continued, her tone dripping with venomous condescension. "Did your pathetic little dreams of doing something other than medicine finally fail completely? Did the real world finally chew you up and spit you out, and now you are here to beg Dad for a miserable handout? On my wedding day of all days?" I stood perfectly still, letting her words wash over me. 10 years ago, Ashley was an arrogant 18-year-old who cheered when our father threw my suitcase down the stairs. She had spent her entire life being praised for her obedience to the family legacy, molded into a perfect replica of our parents' vanity and greed. She was a dermatologist not because she possessed a passion for healing, but because it offered the highest profit margins and the best social status. "I do not need your money, Ashley," I said calmly, making sure my voice carried a steady, unbothered tone, "and I certainly do not need William to give me anything." "Oh, please," Ashley laughed, a high, grating theatrical sound designed to draw even more attention from the crowd. "Look at you. You do not belong here. You never belonged with us. You are a disgrace to this family. You are not a doctor. You are not even a college graduate. You are nothing but a college dropout who could not handle the pressure of real academic rigor." I kept my hands relaxed at my sides. The more she yelled, the more she exposed her true toxic nature to her elite guests. "This is the medical society wedding of the decade," Ashley shrieked, gesturing wildly to the luxurious estate around us. "We have the hospital board of directors here. We have the chief of surgery here. We have politicians and pharmaceutical executives here. And you show up dressed like a common nobody, trying to ruin the most important day of my life, just because you are jealous of my success. You are a pathetic, ugly failure. You have always been jealous of me because I am the daughter they actually love. Your delusion is almost impressive, Ashley, I replied smoothly. I am not here to ruin your wedding. I am simply attending as a guest. A guest! Ashley screamed, her face flushing completely red with fury. The veins in her neck were standing out against her diamond necklace. You are not a guest. You are an unwanted intruder. This is a private elite event for respectable people. We do not allow dropouts. We do not allow failures who bring shame to our family name. She turned to Catherine, her hands shaking with rage. Mom, why is she still standing here? Call security right now. Have her dragged off the property. Catherine immediately nodded, eager to comply with the golden child's demands. Security. Catherine called out, waving her manicured hand frantically toward two burly men in dark suits standing near the edge of the stone terrace. Security, we have a trespasser. We need this woman removed immediately. The two security guards exchanged a quick glance and began to jog across the lawn toward us. The crowd of wealthy guests parted quickly to let them through. The whispers grew louder, turning into audible gasps. I could see the judgment in the eyes of my parents' friends. They were looking at me exactly how my family had painted me, a desperate, estranged, mentally unstable daughter, coming to ruin a beautiful celebration. I watched the guards approaching, their expressions serious and intimidating. I felt the familiar weight of my designer clutch in my hands. The heavy cardstock resting inside it was the key to completely flipping this entire narrative upside down. You are not invited, Ashley yelled one final time, stepping forward to point a manicured finger directly at my chest. You are dead to us. Get out of my sight. I stood perfectly still. Before the security guards could even reach my side, the crowd parted once again. The murmurs died down, completely replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. A tall, imposing figure strode through the sea of guests, moving with the kind of aggressive entitlement that only decades of unchecked power could build. It was my father, William. As the chief of surgery at a prestigious private hospital, he was used to people parting like the Red Sea the moment he entered a room. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, his jaw set in a rigid line of absolute fury. William took one look at the situation, assessing his frantic wife, his supposedly traumatized golden child, and the two security guards closing in. Then his eyes locked onto me. I watched the blood drain from his face before rushing back in a dark purple tide of pure rage. He marched directly toward me, stopping just inches away, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me, exactly as he had done throughout my entire childhood. Nicole, he growled, his voice barely above a guttural whisper, but sharp enough to cut stone. I told you 10 years ago. You are not a part of this family. You are a disgrace to the name. We erased you for a reason, and you dare to show up here today to humiliate us in front of the most important people in our medical society. I met his furious gaze without blinking. Hello, William, I said, keeping my tone completely flat and unbothered. It is a beautiful day for a wedding. Do not play games with me, you pathetic failure, William spat, leaning closer. You think you can just waltz into the most exclusive venue in the Hamptons. You think you can ambush your sister and ruin her perfect day just because your own miserable life amounts to absolutely nothing. I know exactly what you are doing. You are trying to tarnish the family name to drag us down to whatever level you have sunk to. But I will not allow it. You have exactly 10 seconds to turn around and walk out that gate. If you do not, I will have these men physically drag you out, and I will personally press charges for criminal trespassing. You will leave this property in handcuffs. Catherine stood behind him, crossing her arms with a smug, triumphant smile. Ashley wiped away her fake tears and glared at me, her chin raised in absolute victory. They genuinely believed they had won. They truly thought the sheer weight of William's authority would crush me into submission, just like it always did when I was a scared, vulnerable 22-year-old girl. The two security guards finally reached us. The lead guard, a massive man with an earpiece and a stern expression, stepped forward. Ma'am, the guard said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. You are going to have to come with us quietly. Do not make a scene. I am not trespassing, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the sudden dead silence of the outdoor garden. I simply looked down at the guard's hand on my shoulder, then looked back up into his eyes. And I highly suggest you remove your hand before you make a terrible mistake. William let out a booming, arrogant laugh that sounded like a barking dog. A terrible mistake. You are the only mistake here, Nicole. Grab her, he ordered, turning to the guards. Throw her into the street where she belongs. I did not move an inch. Slowly and deliberately, I unclasped the smooth metal lock of my designer clutch. I did not reach for a tissue to wipe away non-existent tears. I did not reach for my phone to call an Uber. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy, thick envelope made of premium gold-leafed cardstock. Actually, Ashley, I am invited, I said, directing my gaze at my sister before turning my attention to the lead security guard. I bypassed my father entirely, extending my hand to give the envelope directly to the guard. I believe you need to check this before you try to escort me anywhere. William scoffed, rolling his eyes. Do not bother looking at that. It is obviously a fake. She is a desperate dropout who probably printed some garbage at a local copy shop. Just get her out of my sight. But the guard did not grab my arm again. He took the envelope from my hand and slid the heavy cardstock out. He scrutinized the invitation, his eyes scanning the elegant calligraphy. Then he tilted the card, catching the late afternoon sunlight against the bottom corner. A bright, intricate holographic seal flashed against the light. The guard's expression transformed instantly. The rigid, intimidating posture vanished, replaced by wide eyes and a sudden, frantic scramble to correct his mistake. He took a rapid step back away from me, his face draining of color. He looked at the card, then looked at me, and immediately bowed his head in a gesture of profound respect. I am so sorry, Mom, the guard stammered, handing the card back to me with both hands. I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. Please enjoy the ceremony. William stared at the guard as if the man had just spoken in a foreign language. What are you? William barked, his face contorting with rage and confusion. I told you to throw her out. She is a trespasser. I cannot do that, sir. The guard replied, his voice firm, but highly apologetic, as he took another step back, creating a protective barrier between me and my furious family. This woman is not a trespasser. She is on the absolute highest tier of the authorized entry list. Catherine gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. That is impossible. We wrote the guest list ourselves. We never put her name on it. She must have stolen it. The guard shook his head, gesturing toward the card in my hand. That is a completely authentic invitation, Mom. It has the custom holographic seal. Only the groom's personal guests have that specific security seal. We were instructed under strict orders not to turn away anyone carrying it. William snatched the card right out of my hand, his eyes darting across the elegant text. His breathing hitched. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at the bold, undeniable lettering printed right beneath my name. Two simple words that made my family's blood run completely cold. Guest of honor. The groom, William whispered, his voice cracking. Andre invited you. Why the hell would Andre invite a defect like you to be his guest of honor? The sheer panic on their faces was absolutely intoxicating. Their perfectly constructed reality was fracturing in front of their elite friends. They could not compute the information. In their shallow, status-obsessed world, I was the ultimate failure, a cautionary tale of what happens when you refuse to obey their commands. I was supposed to be starving. I was supposed to be begging for their forgiveness. Instead, I was standing on the most exclusive property in the Hamptons, holding a level of access they did not even possess themselves. I watched William stare at the gold lettering as if it were a venomous snake about to strike him. Catherine was physically shaking beside him, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the deep lines of stress suddenly forming around her mouth. Ashley stood frozen, her jaw hanging open in profound disbelief. They had spent a decade convincing themselves that I was nothing. They had built an entire fortress of lies around my disappearance. And now, standing on the immaculate lawn of their grandest achievement, the walls of that fortress were beginning to crack. Section 4,000 words. How did you get this? William demanded, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of shock and sheer rage. He gripped the heavy gold cardstock so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. He thrust the VIP invitation right back into my face, refusing to accept the reality unfolding in front of him. Answer me, Nicole, right now. How does a pathetic dropout like you know a man like Andre? How did you manipulate your way onto his personal guest list? You are a nobody. You have absolutely nothing. You are an absolute, complete, and utter fraud. You do not belong in his world or ours. I looked at his deeply flushed face, observing the veins popping along his neck and the absolute disgust burning in his eyes. In that exact moment, the warm, salty breeze of the Hamptons completely vanished. The elegant classical music playing in the background faded into total silence. I was no longer standing on a sunlit, manicured lawn surrounded by high society medical professionals. I was violently pulled backward through time, transported straight back to a freezing December night in Boston exactly 10 years ago. I was 22 years old, standing in the cavernous marble foyer of our Boston estate. The air inside the house felt colder than the howling blizzard outside. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I clutched a single piece of paper. It was my official medical college admission test score report. I had failed. But beneath the paralyzing fear of that failure was a tiny burning spark of absolute clarity. I finally realized that I never wanted to be a surgeon. I hated hospitals. I hated the sterile environment. What I truly loved was technology. I wanted to build medical software. I wanted to create the digital systems that doctors use to save lives. I thought my family of elite medical professionals would understand the immense value of that grand vision. I gathered every single ounce of courage I possessed and confessed my truth. I told William and Catherine that I was dropping out of my pre-medical track to pursue business and health tech. I explained my vision for creating software that could revolutionize hospital data management. I hoped for a shred of parental understanding or at least basic human decency. Instead, I ignited a catastrophic explosion. William did not even yell at first. He simply turned around, marched straight up the grand sweeping staircase, and walked directly into my bedroom. Minutes later, he reappeared at the top of the stairs holding my packed suitcase. With a face twisted in pure demonic rage, he hurled my heavy bag down the wooden steps. It crashed violently against the marble floor, bursting open and scattering my modest clothes everywhere. Graphic design, business, tech. William roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings with terrifying force. We are a family of elite surgeons. We save lives. We do not sit behind desks typing code like worthless peasants. You are an ugly, stupid disappointment. You failed the exam because you are fundamentally lazy and entirely useless. He stormed down the stairs, grabbed me roughly by the arm, and dragged me toward the massive oak front door. He threw the door wide open, letting the freezing winter storm whip violently into the foyer. Get out of my house, he screamed, pointing out into the blinding white snow. You are completely cut off. Do not ever use my prestigious last name to try and get a job anywhere. You are entirely dead to me from this second onward. I scrambled to gather my scattered clothes, stuffing them frantically back into my broken suitcase. I looked up through tear-filled eyes, hoping my mother might intervene and show even a fraction of maternal mercy. Catherine stood safely at the top of the stairs, wrapping her arms protectively around an 18-year-old Ashley. Catherine looked down at me with cold, dead eyes and sneered. Let her go, William. She is a lost cause and a total failure. Ashley is the only real daughter we have left. William slammed the heavy front door shut right in my face. The loud locking mechanism clicked, sealing my fate and entirely severing my connection to the only family I had ever known. I stood alone on the frozen porch wearing nothing but a thin autumn jacket, while the punishing Boston blizzard raged around me. I pulled my phone from my pocket with numb, freezing fingers and checked my mobile banking application. I had exactly $140 to my name, no trust fund, no safety net, no family. I dragged my broken suitcase down the long, snowy driveway, fighting through the blinding wind. I ended up sleeping on the hard, cold floor of a 24-hour diner that night. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself in the dark. The next time my family saw my face, they would be forced to look up. I swore I would build an empire so vast and untouchable that their entire world would look like a tiny, insignificant speck of dust by comparison. Answer me, Nicole. William bellowed violently, snapping me right back to the sunlit reality of the Hamptons wedding. He took another aggressive step forward, waving the gold invitation right in front of my eyes. His face was incredibly slick with sweat and absolute panic. I demand to know how a worthless dropout managed to con her way into his exclusive inner circle. Tell me right now before I call the police and have you locked away in a filthy prison cell for the rest of your miserable life. I stared at him, feeling absolutely no fear, just profound pity for the deeply arrogant and desperate screaming man standing right before me. I opened my mouth to finally deliver the ultimate devastating truth, but a sudden massive movement in the large crowd heavily interrupted us, catching everyone by complete surprise. Before William could utter another threat, a heavy set of French doors swung violently open. The loud noise cut through the tension, causing the surrounding crowd of guests to instantly part ways. A tall, imposing man stepped out onto the manicured grass. It was Andre. At 34 years old, Andre was a brilliant, trailblazing African-American neurosurgeon who commanded absolute respect. Unlike William and his circle of silver spoon elites, Andre had fought for every single achievement. He came from a working-class neighborhood in Detroit. He worked grueling double shifts to survive college, taken out massive loans for medical school, and built his reputation purely on undeniable raw genius. He was the exact kind of self-made success story that my arrogant parents secretly looked down upon, but publicly tolerated because of his rapidly rising fame. His presence demanded immediate attention. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his broad shoulders squared as his sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the sudden commotion disrupting his wedding day. "What is going on out here?" Andre demanded, his deep, resonant voice booming across the silent garden. The moment Ashley heard his voice, her entire demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. The nasty, arrogant sneer she had been directing at me vanished in a fraction of a second. She instantly transformed her face, morphing into a mask of pure terror and distress. She sprinted across the grass, her heavy custom silk gown dragging behind her, and threw her body directly into Andre's chest. She wrapped her arms tightly around his torso, burying her face into his expensive jacket. On command, she forced out loud, theatrical sobs that echoed across the lawn. "Andre, baby, please help me!" Ashley cried hysterically, clinging to him as if her life was in imminent danger. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, weaponizing her fiancé without a single ounce of shame. My crazy, estranged sister just showed up out of nowhere to ruin everything. Andre frowned, his strong hands immediately coming down to grip her shoulders protectively. "Your sister?" he asked, his voice tight with confusion. "You told me your sister disappeared years ago." "She did," Ashley sobbed, her voice rising in a frantic, manipulative pitch. "She is severely mentally unstable, Andre. She deliberately dropped out of college and ruined her life making terrible choices. She hates us because we are successful, and now she has come back to destroy my perfect day. She sneaked past the security gates and ambushed us right here. She is trying to extort Dad for money. She forged a VIP card with your personal seal. Tell them to throw her out right now, baby. Please tell security to drag her off the property." Catherine immediately rushed forward to join the performance, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "It is true," Catherine chimed in, her voice trembling with fake maternal grief. "We tried so hard to help Nicole over the years, but she is completely beyond saving. She is a dangerous, unstable defect. Please, you have to protect Ashley. Have these guards throw her into the street." William stood tall beside his wife, nodding solemnly to validate the absolute fiction they were spinning. He looked at Andre with a serious, authoritative expression, as if he were a deeply concerned father protecting his flock from a rabid wolf. Hearing these vicious lies pour from their mouths, I simply stood my ground. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides and maintained a perfectly calm, neutral expression. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I did not panic. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew who Andre was. Andre reacted exactly as any protective groom would when faced with an intruder threatening his crying bride. His jaw tightened into a rigid, furious line. His dark eyes flashed with intense, protective anger. He pulled Ashley closer, wrapping a strong, sheltering arm around her shoulders to shield her from the perceived threat. He glared fiercely at the two security guards standing near me, furious that they had allowed a mentally unstable stalker to get this close to his future wife. "Why is this woman still standing here?" Andre barked at the lead security guard, his voice vibrating with authority. "Remove her from the premises immediately." The lead guard shifted uncomfortably, holding his ground. "Sir, I cannot do that," the guard replied respectfully, gesturing toward the heavy gold cardstock still clutched in William's sweating hand. She presented a completely authentic guest of honor pass. Andre narrowed his eyes in absolute fury. He turned his head, looking over Ashley's sobbing form to finally confront the woman who had supposedly forged his personal seal and ruined his wedding day. He prepared to unleash his anger to banish the pathetic, jealous sister his bride described. But the very second his dark eyes locked onto mine, the furious words died in his throat. I did not break eye contact. I offered him a small, warm, genuine smile of recognition. The physical reaction that seized Andre's body was immediate and profound. He stopped breathing. The fierce, protective anger radiating from his features evaporated in less than a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His broad shoulders dropped. His jaw fell open slightly. He stared at my face, stared at the emerald dress, stared at the calm, confident posture of the woman standing before him. He looked down at this gold-leafed invitation trembling in William's hand, then his eyes snapped back to mine. The hostility completely vanished, leaving behind an expression of profound, undeniable reverence. Andre stood paralyzed in the center of the manicured lawn. He slowly, deliberately unwrapped his protective arm from around Ashley's shoulders. He ignored her confused whimpers. He ignored Catherine's dramatic gasps. He simply stepped away from his bride, breaking the physical contact entirely as the devastating reality of the situation crashed down upon him. He closed the distance between us, moving as though he were approaching royalty, leaving his toxic, lying family utterly bewildered in his wake. Andre stopped mere inches from me. The absolute silence of the Hamptons estate amplified the sound of the ocean waves crashing in the distance. He did not call security. He did not raise his voice at me. Instead, he extended his right hand with a formality and deep respect that sent a shockwave through the watching crowd. "Nicole," he said, his voice thick with genuine astonishment. "Ms. Mitchell, I cannot believe you actually came. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person." I took his hand, giving it a firm, professional shake. "The pleasure is mine, Andre," I replied, offering a polite smile. "I do not usually attend weddings, but I wanted to see the brilliant mind I have been hearing so much about. Congratulations on your big day. The garden looks beautiful." Behind him, Ashley looked like she had just been struck by lightning. Her mouth hung open. The fake tears had completely dried on her cheeks, replaced by genuine, unadulterated panic. She took a hesitant step forward, her custom silk gown rustling loudly against the pristine grass. "Andre," she stammered, her voice trembling as she reached out to grab his sleeve again. "What are you doing? Why are you shaking her hand?" "I just told you she is a dangerous trespasser. She is a psychotic failure who dropped out of school. Tell them to throw her out." Andre did not just pull his arm away this time. He swatted her hand away as if her touch physically repulsed him. He turned around to face his bride, his future in-laws, and the hundreds of elite medical professionals gathered on the lawn. The protective warmth he had shown Ashley just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, furious storm. "How dare you!" Andre roared, his voice booming across the garden with the force of thunder. The sheer volume and intensity of his anger made several guests physically jump back. "How dare you speak to this woman like that? How dare any of you disrespect her on this property?" Catherine let out a high-pitched gasp, pressing her hands against her chest as if she might faint. "Andre, have you lost your mind?" she shrieked, looking wildly at the hospital board members who were watching the scene with rapt attention. "She is a defect. She is the family embarrassment. We had to cut her off because she could not even pass her medical exams. She is a worthless dropout." Andre took a step toward Catherine, his dark eyes blazing with unchecked fury. "A dropout," he repeated, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "A worthless defect. Is that really what you have been telling yourselves for the past 10 years? Is that the pathetic lie you spun to protect your fragile egos?" William stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest and assert his dominance. He pointed a shaking finger at Andre. You listen to me right now, he barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. You are marrying my daughter. You will respect this family. That woman standing behind you is a nobody. She brings nothing but shame to our prestigious name. Now step aside and let security do their job before I reconsider paying for this wedding. Andre let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut through William's arrogant threat. You have absolutely no idea who you are talking to, do you, William? You are standing here acting like a king, calling your own flesh and blood a failure, while you are entirely blind to the reality standing right in front of your face. Ashley grabbed her head, pulling at her perfectly styled hair. Andre, stop it, she cried out, stomping her foot like a petulant child. Why are you defending her? She is just a pathetic artist who ran out of money. She is not a pathetic artist, Ashley. Andre snapped, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the mansion. She did not need to pass a medical exam to conquer the healthcare industry. He turned back to the crowd, sweeping his arm toward me, ensuring every single elite surgeon, hospital director, and medical socialite heard his next words clearly. This woman standing before you is not a failure, Andre declared, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable reverence. She is Nicole Mitchell. She is the chief executive officer and the sole founder of Apex Health Tech. The name dropped over the manicured lawn like a massive explosive device. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. The wealthy guests exchanged wide-eyed, horrified glances. In the medical and financial world, Apex Health Tech was not just a successful company. It was an aggressive, untouchable titan. It was a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm that funded the most advanced surgical robotics data systems and pharmaceutical research in the entire country. Everyone in that garden knew the name. Everyone respected the power it commanded. I watched William closely. The progression of his facial expressions was a masterclass in psychological devastation. At first, his brain simply rejected the information. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if trying to physically dislodge the words Andre had just spoken. But then the reality began to sink in. He remembered the articles in the medical journals. He remembered the aggressive corporate acquisitions that had been terrifying private hospital owners across the East Coast. He realized the CEO of that ruthless corporate empire shared his daughter's first name and his wife's maiden name. William's jaw literally dropped. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. His hands, which had been curled into aggressive fists, fell limply to his sides. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. Apex. William choked out his voice, nothing more than a ragged, broken whisper. Apex Health Tech, the venture capital firm, the one holding the primary patents for the new neurological surgical arms. Yes, William. Andre fired back, his dark eyes locking onto my father with merciless intensity. The multi-billion-dollar firm, the one that controls half the medical supply chains on this seaboard. Catherine swayed on her feet, grabbing William's arm to keep herself from collapsing onto the grass. But she is just a dropout, Catherine babbled, her voice high and panicked. She failed her tests. She had no money. We cut her off. She slept on the street. She built an empire while you played dress-up in the Hamptons, Andre sneered. You threw her out because she wanted to build medical technology instead of holding a scalpel. You called her a disgrace. And now she holds more power, more wealth, and more influence in the medical community than your entire family combined. Ashley looked like she was suffocating. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate kind of terror. The realization that the sister she had mocked and degraded her entire life was actually a billionaire tech mogul was physically destroying her. Her perfect high society facade crumbled completely into dust. No, Ashley gasped, shaking her head violently as her custom veil slipped off her shoulders. No, that is impossible. She cannot be a billionaire. She is Nicole. She is just Nicole. She is Nicole Mitchell. Andre corrected, stepping away from his bride to stand firmly by my side, presenting a united front. And she is the most powerful person on this estate today. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me, maintaining my calm, unwavering smile. I looked at the three people who had made my youth a living nightmare. The golden child who thought she was untouchable. the mother who cared only about status, the arrogant surgeon father who thought his money made him a god. They were standing in their most expensive clothes at their most prestigious event, completely paralyzed by the massive weight of my success. The sheer scale of their miscalculation was finally crushing them exactly as I had promised myself it would 10 years ago. Andre broke the silence. His voice was lower now, but it carried a deadly edge that made the surrounding guests lean in closer, desperate to hear every single word. He turned his attention fully back to Ashley, who was still shivering in her custom wedding gown, despite the warm summer sun beating down on the manicured estate. "You looked me right in the eye and told me your sister was a drug addict," Andre said. His tone was laced with a cold, heavy disgust that made Ashley physically flinch, as if she had been struck. "You sat in our living room and spun a tragic, elaborate story about how your older sister got mixed up with the wrong crowd, spiraled into severe substance abuse, and ran away to live on the streets. You actually cried, Ashley. You shed real tears telling me how your parents spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on luxury rehabilitation centers trying to save her, but she kept stealing from you and eventually vanished without a trace." Ashley scrambled backward, her designer heels sinking into the soft grass as she shook her head frantically. "Andre, baby, please try to understand my position." I had to say something to explain her absence. I could not just tell my brilliant, successful fiancé that my sister was a lazy college dropout. It would have completely humiliated our family name in front of your peers. I was just trying to protect our flawless reputation. You know how important image is in our medical circle. Protect your reputation, Andre repeated, letting out a harsh, bitter laugh that held absolutely no humor. You lied to my face for 2 solid years. You painted a brilliant self-made tech mogul as a hopeless, desperate addict just to cover up your own family's toxic cruelty. You are not protecting your reputation, Ashley. You are hiding your sheer incompetence and crippling insecurity behind a massive wall of disgusting fabrications. Catherine tried to step forward, reaching a trembling, heavily jeweled hand out to touch Andre's arm in a pathetic attempt to pacify him. "Andre, please listen to reason. We were trying to protect you too. We did not want you associated with someone who violently refused to respect the medical traditions of this proud family. We only wanted the best for your future together." Andre aggressively stepped back, refusing to let Catherine make physical contact. "Do not talk to me about my future, Catherine. And do not ever talk to me about medical traditions. Your husband knows absolutely nothing about actual medicine or patient care. He only cares about maximizing his profit margins and protecting his inflated ego." Andre turned his burning, intense gaze onto William. My father had not moved a single inch from his spot on the lawn. He was still staring at me, looking as though all the oxygen had been completely vacuumed out of his lungs. His arrogant posture had entirely collapsed. "Let us talk about your prestigious hospital board," William Andre said, his voice echoing with absolute authority over the silent crowd. "Let us talk about what happened exactly 3 years ago when I stood in your pristine mahogany boardroom and pitched my revolutionary oncology research project. I had discovered a completely new neurological pathway for treating highly aggressive brain tumors. I had the hard data. I had the clinical trials mapped out flawlessly. I just needed the $25 million funding grant to build the specialized surgical equipment required to save thousands of dying patients." William swallowed hard, a visible bead of sweat rolling down his forehead and dropping onto his stiff tuxedo collar. "Andre, this is absolutely not the time or the place to discuss private hospital administration matters." "This is exactly the time and the place," Andre roared, silencing my father completely. "You looked at my detailed proposal. You looked at the projected survival rates. And then you literally laughed in my face. You told me my research was a pathetic charity case. You told me that curing those specific tumors lacked sufficient profit margins for your elite hospital to invest in. You rejected my life-saving project because it would not buy you another luxury yacht for your summer vacations." The wealthy guests surrounding us began to murmur loudly in genuine shock. Fellow surgeons and medical professionals exchanged horrified, offended glances. William was rapidly losing his pristine public image right in front of his most important peers and investors. "I was completely devastated." Andre continued, his voice thick with lingering frustration and ultimate triumph. "I thought my research was dead in the water. I thought those innocent patients were going to die because elite, arrogant surgeons like you cared more about billing codes than human lives. But then, exactly 2 days after you threw me out of your office, a miracle happened. Andre turned back to me, his expression softening into a look of profound, deep respect. He gestured toward me with open hands, presenting me to the stunned crowd. An anonymous venture capital firm stepped in. They reviewed my extensive data overnight. They did not ask a single question about profit margins or corporate returns. They only asked how many lives the new technology could save. They wired the entire $25 million to my research lab the very next morning without hesitation. They fully funded the robotic arms. They funded the expensive clinical trials. They made everything I have achieved today entirely possible. Ashley was hyperventilating now, grasping at the intricate lace bodice of her expensive wedding dress. "No," she gasped out, shaking her head side to side in rapid denial. "No, Andre, please do not say it. Please do not tell me she gave you the money." "She did not just give me the money," Ashley Andre snapped, firing the words like bullets into her fragile ego. "She gave me my entire career. Nicole Mitchell and Apex Health Tech saved my research. They saved those patients. She is the sole anonymous benefactor who made me the top neurosurgeon in this country." Andre looked at my parents, his eyes filled with pure, unadulterated contempt. "I sent a VIP invitation to my anonymous investor through her corporate legal team. I wanted the person who believed in me, when no one else did, to be the absolute guest of honor at my wedding. I wanted to look my savior in the eye and thank her properly. I had absolutely no idea she was related to the toxic, lying, manipulative family I was about to marry into. She uses her mother's maiden name professionally, so I never made the connection to your family tree." The absolute perfection of the irony was not lost on a single person in that garden. William had rejected the groom for lacking profit. Ashley had lied about her sister to seem superior. Catherine had insulted a woman she thought was a beggar. And the entire time, the very foundation of the groom's massive medical success, the very prestige they were all so eager to attach themselves to, was entirely funded by the daughter they threw into the freezing snow. I maintained my steady, confident posture, letting the silence stretch out. I looked directly at William and watched his massive ego shatter into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. He finally realized the sheer, devastating magnitude of his monumental mistake. The daughter he casually discarded had not just survived his cruelty. She had become the ultimate power broker in his own industry. He was nothing compared to the empire I had built from the ground up. Looking at their frozen, horrified faces, I felt a profound sense of vindication wash over me. The agonizing journey from the freezing streets of Boston to this manicured Hamptons estate had been nothing short of brutal. They stood there completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of my revelation, while my mind drifted back to the agonizing years of my ascent. When William slammed that heavy oak door in my face 10 years ago, he intended to break me. He assumed I would fail because in his elitist worldview, success only came from prestigious medical degrees. He fundamentally underestimated my resilience. The first year after my sudden eviction was a daily grueling battle for basic survival. I spent my initial night sleeping in a 24-hour diner, clutching my broken suitcase and buying a single cup of coffee just to stay warm. I quickly realized that tears would not pay my rent or fund my grand vision. I found a dilapidated studio apartment in the cheapest part of the city. The heating barely worked and the window rattled violently, but it was mine. To afford that freezing box and keep my tech dreams alive, I took on 3 night jobs. I worked as a janitor, cleaning the very same corporate offices I would later purchase. I scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans, holding onto my pride with a fierce, unyielding grip. When my cleaning shift ended, I rushed to a local diner to wait tables serving breakfast to the same exhausted hospital residents my father loved to terrorize. My third job was remote data entry for a struggling regional clinic. I typed endless rows of patient information and insurance claims until my vision blurred. I slept maybe 3 hours, operating entirely on caffeine and a burning desire for absolute independence. Every single dollar I earned went directly into my education. I paid for intensive coding boot camps out of pocket. I devoured online business courses studying market economics, software architecture, and venture capital strategies while riding the subway between my minimum wage jobs. I taught myself advanced programming languages, sitting on the cold floor of my apartment, typing on a refurbished laptop I bought from a pawn shop. My family had always mocked my interest in technology, calling it a hobby for peasants. I turned their toxic mockery into the exact fuel I needed to build my massive technology empire. It was during my exhausting hours doing medical data entry that I discovered massive glaring flaws in the American healthcare system. I saw firsthand how incredibly inefficient hospital databases were. Patient records were siloed across incompatible networks, causing critical delays in emergency treatments. Surgical supply chains were an absolute logistical nightmare, wasting billions of dollars annually due to poor tracking and outdated ordering protocols. Doctors were spending more time fighting with broken software interfaces than treating their patients. The entire infrastructure was bleeding money and costing human lives. I knew I had to fix this incredibly broken technological software system. I saw the exact solution clear as day. I knew how to build a unified, seamless data management platform that could streamline surgical operations, track life-saving resources in real time, and eliminate massive bureaucratic waste. I transformed my freezing apartment into a chaotic innovation laboratory. I spent the next 3 years coding obsessively. I ignored holidays, ignored social gatherings, and ignored the physical exhaustion settling deep into my bones. I built the entire prototype from scratch, testing the algorithms against publicly available medical data sets, until the software was absolutely flawless and completely ready for the modern digital market. When I pitched my completed software to a group of angel investors, I was 25 years old. I walked into that sleek glass boardroom wearing a thrift store suit but armed with undeniable revolutionary data. They tried to dismiss me at first, seeing a young woman without a famous last name or an Ivy League degree. But the moment I demonstrated how my platform could save their hospital networks hundreds of millions of dollars within the first fiscal quarter, the entire atmosphere shifted. They realized I held the future of modern medical technology right in my hands, and they wanted in. 1 year later, a massive tech conglomerate recognized the undeniable value of my software. They offered to buy my first startup. I sat at a polished mahogany table and signed a contract that sold the company I built in a freezing studio apartment for exactly $50 million. I was 26 years old. I had more money in my personal bank account than William had earned in his entire arrogant surgical career. But 50 million was merely the starting line for my ultimate vision. I wanted to control the very funding that dictated the future of global medicine. I took that $50 million and immediately launched Apex Health Tech. I became a venture capitalist focusing exclusively on aggressive life-saving medical innovations. I funded robotic surgical arms, advanced oncology research, and revolutionary pharmaceutical developments. When I registered the corporation, I made one highly calculated decision. I completely dropped my father's prestigious last name, refusing to let his toxic legacy ride on my coattails. I used my mother's maiden name, Mitchell. It was the perfect disguise, allowing me to operate quietly and ruthlessly in the background, while my family remained entirely oblivious to my rapidly expanding empire. I spent the last 6 years aggressively multiplying that fortune, turning Apex Health Tech into a multi-billion-dollar titan. I purchased hospitals, fired incompetent executives, and elevated brilliant minds like Andre, who actually cared about saving lives rather than maximizing vanity. I transformed myself from the discarded daughter into the most formidable power broker in their industry. Looking back at their stunned, pale faces in the Hamptons sunlight, I knew every single sleepless night had been worth it. The flashback faded, returning my full, sharp attention to the present moment where my family was finally realizing the undeniable truth. The whispering among the wealthy guests grew from a soft hum into a deafening roar. Highly respected surgeons, hospital administrators, and local politicians were exchanging horrified glances and pointing directly at my father. The elite society witnessed his collapse. William realized his prestigious reputation was actively disintegrating in front of the very people he spent his entire life trying to impress. Survival instinct immediately kicked in, overriding his shock. William threw his head back and let out a booming theatrical laugh that echoed loudly across the manicured lawn. The sound was incredibly forced, completely devoid of any genuine humor, but it was loud enough to slice through the rising gossip. "What a spectacular misunderstanding," William announced, waving his hands expansively toward the crowd. He plastered on a wide, painfully fake smile, ensuring his pearly white teeth caught the afternoon sunlight. "Just a classic family inside joke, everyone. Please do not mind our dramatic flair. Grab a fresh glass of champagne and enjoy the string quartet. The ceremony preparations will continue shortly." He turned to me, keeping the massive plastic smile fixed on his face, but his eyes were entirely dead. He stepped close enough that I could smell the stale panic sweating through his expensive cologne. He reached out and aggressively gripped my elbow, his fingers digging sharply into my skin. Inside, he hissed through clenched teeth, barely moving his lips, so the guests would not see his fury. "Right now. Both of you come with us." He shot a frantic, glaring look at Catherine and Ashley, demanding they follow his lead. I easily yanked my arm out of his aggressive grasp, stepping out of his reach. "Do not touch me, William," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and level. But I turned and walked toward the massive French doors of the main estate anyway. I wanted to see exactly how they planned to spin this disaster in private. William marched right behind me, herding us away from the prying eyes of his wealthy peers. We walked through the grand foyer of the Hamptons mansion, away from the bustling catering staff, and directly into the secluded private bridal suite. The room was dripping with excessive luxury, featuring velvet sofas, massive gilded mirrors, and expensive floral arrangements. William shoved Ashley inside and slammed the heavy mahogany doors shut behind us. The thick wood immediately muted the party noise outside, locking us into a tense, suffocating bubble of isolation. The very second the heavy door clicked shut, the performative dynamic shifted with terrifying speed. The absolute panic on Catherine's face melted away, replaced instantly by a sickeningly sweet mask of maternal devotion. She let out a loud theatrical gasp, pressing both hands over her heart, as if overwhelmed by sheer joy. Catherine burst into fake dramatic tears. She rushed across the plush carpet, throwing her arms wide open, preparing to pull me into a tight embrace. "Oh, Nicole." Catherine cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured affection. "My beautiful, brilliant, successful girl. I always knew you had it in you. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. I missed you so incredibly much, my sweet daughter." I took a sharp, immediate step backward, holding up my hand to block her approach. Her arms wrapped around empty air, and she stumbled slightly awkwardly, dropping her hands to her sides. "Stop it, Catherine," I said, my tone dropping to a flat, icy register. "Do not embarrass yourself further. You are going to ruin your expensive makeup with those fake tears." Catherine blinked rapidly, attempting to look wounded by my rejection. She clasped her hands together tightly, holding them under her chin, in a posture of desperate prayer. "How can you say that, Nicole?" She whimpered, her voice dripping with artificial grief. "We have been praying for your success every single day. We never stopped believing in your incredible potential. We always knew you were a genius." I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical disgust for the woman who had birthed me. "You called me a worthless defect exactly 20 minutes ago," I reminded her, keeping my gaze fixed dead on hers. "You told your elite friends I was doing charity work in a dangerous country just to hide the immense shame of my existence. You told my sister to call security to drag me off this property. Do not stand there and pretend you ever believed in my potential." William suddenly cleared his throat, stepping forward to completely dominate the conversation. He unbuttoned his custom tuxedo jacket, puffing out his chest, and standing as tall as possible. The terrified, cornered old man on the lawn was gone. In his place stood the arrogant, tyrannical surgeon I remembered from my youth. He looked at me with a sickening gleam of greedy pride in his eyes. "Your mother is right," Nicole, William declared, using his booming, authoritative voice. "We did believe in you. In fact, you need to understand exactly why we did what we did 10 years ago. We saw that you lacked the discipline required to conquer the medical field. We had to give you a harsh reality check." I crossed my arms, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "A harsh reality check?" I asked. Yes, William said, stepping even closer, leaning in with absolute unearned confidence. If I had not thrown your suitcase out into the freezing snow that night, you would have never found the ruthless drive required to build a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. You would have stayed weak and dependent. My tough love is the exact reason you are standing here today as the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Health Tech. I made you a billionaire, Nicole. Our harsh parenting forged you into a weapon. You should be thanking us for setting you on the path to immense wealth. The sheer, unadulterated narcissism of his statement hung heavily in the air of the bridal suite. He actually believed he deserved the credit for every single drop of blood, sweat, and tears I poured into my company. Ashley wiped her face and nodded vigorously in agreement. Her fake eyelashes were slightly crooked, but her greedy expression mirrored our father's perfectly. Dad is right, Nicole, Ashley chimed in, stepping up beside him. We are family, and family pushes each other to succeed. You have money now. You have prestige. We can just put the past behind us. I looked at the three of them standing shoulder to shoulder, presenting a united front of utter delusion and boundless greed. They were attempting to gaslight me into believing my trauma was a gift. They were trying to rewrite a decade of cruel abandonment into a heartwarming story of tough love. They expected me to simply nod, accept their twisted logic, and open my checkbook to fund their lavish lifestyle. They expected the scared 22-year-old girl to fall right back into line under the crushing weight of their authority. But I was not that scared young girl anymore. I was the absolute apex predator of their industry, and they were about to learn exactly how dangerous I had become. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that immediately wiped the smug satisfaction right off my father's face. The sound was cold and hollow, echoing against the luxurious wallpaper of the bridal suite. You are claiming credit for my success because you made me homeless, I asked, raising a single skeptical eyebrow. You actually stand there in your custom tuxedo and expect me to thank you for tossing me into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on my back. William opened his mouth to double down on his absurd narrative, but I cut him off, stepping forward to reclaim the space he had tried to dominate. Stop talking, William, I commanded. My voice did not rise, but the sheer authority in my tone made him snap his mouth shut. Do not insult my intelligence. You did not throw me out to build character. You threw me out because my decision to leave the pre-medical track embarrassed you in front of your wealthy country club friends. You threw me out because I refused to be a shiny trophy you could parade around hospital galas. You cast me aside because you are a raging narcissist who discards anything he cannot control. I turned my gaze to my mother, who was still clutching her pearl necklace. And you, Catherine, I said, watching her flinch. You stood at the top of those stairs and called me a lost cause. You spent the last decade telling the elite medical society that I was digging wells in a third-world country because the reality of an independent daughter terrified you. So spare me the fake tears and the sudden maternal devotion. You do not love me. You love my net worth. Ashley crossed her arms, her custom silk wedding dress rustling loudly in the quiet room. You are being completely unreasonable, Nicole. We are offering you a chance to rejoin the family. We are forgiving you for hiding all of this from us. You should be grateful we are even willing to talk to you after the stunt you pulled on the lawn. I turned to my sister, offering her a smile that held absolutely no warmth. I do not need your forgiveness, Ashley. And I certainly do not need an invitation back into a family that functions like a toxic cartel. Now tell me what you actually want. Because I know William did not drag me into this private room just to offer a heartwarming family reunion. You want something. You always want something. The fabricated warmth instantly vanished from William's face. The benevolent, strict father routine evaporated completely, leaving behind the ruthless, calculated businessman I remembered so vividly. He adjusted his silk tie and squared his shoulders, adopting the authoritative posture he used when barking orders at junior surgeons. Fine, William said, his voice dropping its affectionate pretense and turning briskly transactional. Let us skip the pleasantries and treat this like the business arrangement it is. You are a venture capitalist. You understand how the corporate healthcare system operates. I nodded slowly, waiting for him to expose his true agenda. Go on. The family hospital. William began pacing across the plush carpet of the bridal suite, is currently undergoing a massive expansion phase. We are upgrading the entire surgical wing and investing heavily in new administrative facilities. However, we have recently run into some temporary financial roadblocks. The market is shifting, and insurance payouts have been delayed. We are experiencing some severe liquidity issues. Liquidity issues, I repeated, feigning a mild, polite interest. That is a very elegant corporate phrase for saying you are completely out of cash and drowning in massive debt. Catherine gasped defensively. It is a minor cash flow problem, Nicole. Just a temporary setback. The hospital is incredibly prestigious. We just need a small financial bridge to get us through the next fiscal quarter until our accounts receivable balance out. William waved his hand to silence his wife, keeping his intense gaze locked entirely on me. Do not patronize me, Nicole. You know exactly how private healthcare financing works. We have significant loans coming due, and our primary lenders are being difficult about restructuring the terms. We need an immediate capital injection to stabilize the operational budget and keep the expansion on track. And you expect me to provide this capital injection, I asked, keeping my tone completely neutral. I expect you to do your duty to this family, William declared loudly, stepping into my personal space again. I expect you to use your massive corporate resources to protect the legacy that gave you your life. You have access to billions of dollars through Apex Health Tech. We need a family bridge loan. $15 million transferred directly into the hospital's primary operational account by Tuesday morning. $15 million, I said, testing the weight of the massive number on my tongue. You brought me into this room to demand $15 million. It is a drop in the bucket for a firm like yours. William insisted, his voice rising with entitled arrogance. You owe me this, Nicole. I gave you the harsh push you needed to become the ruthless CEO you are today. I created the fire inside you. Without my strict discipline, you would be absolutely nothing. You owe your entire empire to my parenting. $15 million is a completely reasonable price to pay to secure your father's legacy and save the family business from absolute bankruptcy. Ashley nodded vigorously, stepping up to stand beside our father. Exactly, Nicole. $15 million is nothing to you. You throw that kind of money at random research projects like Andres. You can certainly afford to bail out your own flesh and blood. You owe us for abandoning us for 10 years. You owe us for making us worry about you. I stood in the center of the lavish bridal suite, surrounded by my mother, my father, and my sister. I looked at their greedy, desperate faces. They were attempting to extort a massive fortune from the daughter they had violently discarded. They actually believed that their demands held weight. They thought they could simply command me to open my checkbook and save them from their own gross financial incompetence. They thought I was still that terrified, vulnerable 22-year-old girl desperate for their toxic approval. So let me get this straight, I said slowly, making sure to articulate every single word with crystal clear precision. 10 years ago, you threw me out into a freezing blizzard because I was not good enough to carry your name. Today you insult me, call security to throw me off the property and label me a defect. And now you demand a $15 million cash bailout to save your failing hospital, acting as if I owe you my entire existence. That is exactly right, William said, crossing his arms and looking entirely triumphant. We take care of our own, Nicole. Welcome back to the family. Now write the check. I did not reach for my checkbook. I did not blink. I just looked at the arrogant tyrant standing before me, knowing the trap I had set was finally ready to snap completely shut. Before I could even formulate the first syllable of my response to William, his precious golden child decided it was time to claim her own piece of the pie. Ashley stepped directly in front of our father, blocking my view of him. She smoothed the front of her custom silk wedding dress and lifted her chin, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Well, she said, her voice adopting that familiar, condescending tone she had perfected since we were teenagers. Since we are laying everything out on the table and discussing family obligations, I think we need to talk about my wedding gift. Your wedding gift, I asked, genuinely curious to see how deep her delusion actually ran. Yes, Nicole, my wedding gift, Ashley said sharply. You showed up here today unannounced and completely ruined my mood. You caused a massive scene on the lawn in front of my elite guests. You embarrassed me in front of Andre and his entire network. Do you have any idea how stressful it was for me to look at you standing there in your green dress acting like you owned the place? I was absolutely humiliated. You were humiliated because you called security on your own sister, I pointed out, keeping my voice steady. You humiliated yourself. I am not finished, Ashley snapped, stamping her foot on the plush carpet. You have been hiding a massive fortune from us for years. You lied by omission. We thought you were struggling. We thought you were a miserable failure. And all this time you were sitting on billions of dollars and refusing to share it with the people who raised you. Do you know how incredibly selfish that is? You owe us for that deception. And frankly, you owe us for embarrassing the family name by choosing to work in technology instead of becoming a real doctor. I stared at her cognitive dissonance. You think me building a multi-billion-dollar healthcare technology firm is an embarrassment because I do not hold a scalpel? Of course it is an embarrassment, Ashley scoffed, crossing her arms. You are just a glorified software vendor. You are essentially a salesperson selling computer programs to actual medical professionals like Dad and me. You sit behind a desk while we are out there doing the real prestigious work. You could have been a surgeon, but you chose the easy, lazy way out. So yes, you owe this family a massive apology for running away and making us look bad. And you owe me an apology for trying to upstage me on the most important day of my life. So what exactly is the price of this grand apology, Ashley? What is the exact cost of your forgiveness today? Ashley exchanged a quick, greedy glance with Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked back at me, her eyes gleaming with a ravenous hunger that made my stomach churn. 10%, Ashley declared, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. I want a 10% equity stake in Apex Health Tech transferred directly into my personal portfolio by the end of the week. The demand hung in the air of the bridal suite, heavy and absurd. 10% of my company, 10% of an empire valued in the billions. She was demanding hundreds of millions of dollars simply because my presence had stressed her out and because she felt entitled to the fruits of my grueling labor. With 10%. Ashley continued, speaking rapidly as if the deal was already finalized. Andre and I will have a proper financial foundation to start our marriage. It will serve as compensation for the immense emotional distress you caused me today. Once the shares are fully transferred in my name, I will officially forgive you. Mom and Dad will welcome you back with open arms. We can take some nice family photos today for the foundation website and pretend the last 10 years of your absence were just a slight misunderstanding. You can finally belong to this family again, Nicole. All it costs is 10%. Catherine stepped up beside Ashley, placing a supportive hand on her younger daughter's shoulder. It really is the most fair and equitable solution, Catherine added, her voice dripping with toxic sweetness. It shows that you are truly committed to healing this family, Nicole. It shows you respect your sister and value our forgiveness above your own selfish hoarding of wealth. I looked at my family standing together in stern agreement with this absolutely insane extortion attempt. They were entirely serious. They genuinely believed that their toxic conditional love was a commodity so valuable that I would eagerly trade hundreds of millions of dollars just to possess a tiny fraction of it. They thought the threat of their continued rejection would force me to hand over the keys to the kingdom I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I tried to maintain my cold, composed demeanor. I tried to stay perfectly professional and detached. But the sheer staggering delusion of their demands finally broke through my rigid self-control. I started to laugh. It did not start as a polite chuckle. It started deep in my chest and erupted out of my mouth as a loud, genuine, unrestricted burst of laughter. I threw my head back and laughed so hard that my eyes began to water. The sound bounced off the high ceilings of the bridal suite, completely shattering the tense atmosphere my family had tried to construct. I laughed at the absurdity of William demanding $15 million to save his fraudulent hospital. I laughed at Catherine's fake maternal devotion. And I laughed directly in Ashley's furious, insulted face at her demand for a 10% stake in my life's work. What is so funny? Ashley screamed, her face turning a violently bright shade of crimson. Her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. Stop laughing at me, Nicole. There is absolutely nothing funny about this. This is a serious business negotiation. I slowly caught my breath, wiping a single tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. I straightened my posture and looked at her, shaking my head in pure disbelief. A serious business negotiation, I repeated, letting out another sharp bark of laughter. Ashley, You are demanding a 10% equity stake in a private venture capital firm valued at over $3 billion because I ruined your mood. You want $300 million as a wedding gift to compensate for your emotional distress. You do not even understand basic corporate finance, and you stand there demanding shares like you are ordering a side dish at a restaurant. I am your sister, Ashley shrieked, her voice breaking with indignant rage. I am entitled to a share of your wealth. We share the exact same blood. We share genetics. I corrected my voice, dropping its amused tone and returning to a hard, icy edge. That is all we share. You are entitled to absolutely nothing. You stood on those stairs 10 years ago and watched Dad throw me into a blizzard. You smiled when Mom called me a lost cause. You spent the last decade enjoying the luxury and prestige of this family, while I scrubbed floors and slept in a freezing apartment to build my company. You do not get to swoop in at the finish line and demand a crown you did not earn. William stepped forward again, his face dark with renewed anger, pushing past his wife and younger daughter. Enough of this nonsense, William bellowed, pointing a harsh finger directly at my face. You will give Ashley her wedding gift and you will transfer the $15 million to my hospital by Tuesday. You will do this because I am your father and I command you to do it. If you refuse, I will destroy you. I looked at his pointing finger and felt the last remaining invisible chain of my childhood completely snap. The fear was entirely gone. The intimidation tactic failed spectacularly. Destroy me, I asked, tilting my head slightly. And how exactly do you plan to do that, William? He sneered, his eyes narrowing into vicious little slits. I told you out there on the lawn, and I am telling you again. I will call my contacts at the Wall Street Journal. I will call the Boston Globe. I will call every single medical board in this country and tell them that the CEO of Apex Health Tech is a ruthless, mentally unstable sociopath who abandoned her aging parents and hates the medical profession. I will publicly drag your name through the mud until your investors pull out and your company stock tanks into absolute oblivion. I will ruin your corporate reputation by Monday morning. The threat was laid bare. Blackmail. Pure desperate extortion. I did not flinch. I simply let his threat hang in the silent air of the bridal suite, taking a slow, deliberate breath. Are you quite finished? I asked. William stared at me, his chest heaving with exertion. He clearly expected me to drop to my knees and beg for mercy. When my expression did not change, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. Finished, he spat out, stepping even closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his furious body. I have not even started, Nicole. You think your billions protect you from the real world, but you are completely ignorant of how true power operates. Money is just paper. Influence is what runs the healthcare industry, and I have spent 40 years building an impenetrable network of absolute influence. He began to pace around the bridal suite, waving his hands frantically to emphasize his points. I play golf every single weekend with the senior editors of the Wall Street Journal and the Boston Globe. I sit on the executive committee of the American Medical Association. I know the people who approve your patents. I know the hospital directors who buy your software. By Monday morning, I will personally call every single one of them. I will tell them that the CEO of Apex Health Tech is a pathological liar who abandoned her family and stole her initial software designs from a struggling medical student. Catherine nodded vigorously, moving to stand beside her husband. Her fake maternal warmth had completely evaporated, exposing the calculating socialite underneath. And I will call every media outlet in the state. Catherine added, her voice shrill and confident. I will sit on daytime television and weep about elder abuse. I will tell the world how we sacrificed everything to raise a troubled, unstable daughter, only for her to hoard her wealth while her aging parents faced financial ruin. The public loves a tragic story, Nicole. They will despise you. Your investors will flee the moment the public relations nightmare hits the news cycle. You will be toxic. No one will want to associate their clean medical brands with a sociopathic CEO who abuses her own mother. Ashley eagerly jumped back into the extortion ring, her diamond earrings catching the light as she stepped forward. She crossed her arms tightly over her custom wedding gown. And do not forget about my network, Ashley sneered. I have millions of followers online. My husband Andre is one of the most respected neurosurgeons in the country. We will issue a joint public statement condemning your business ethics. We will urge every major hospital network on the East Coast to boycott Apex Health Tech products. You might have money right now, Nicole, but we have the platform. We have the credibility. We will cancel you so thoroughly that you will be begging us to take that 10% equity stake just to save whatever is left of your burning empire. I stood perfectly still, letting their elaborate, vicious threats bounce off me. It was genuinely fascinating to watch them construct this detailed fantasy of my destruction. They were so incredibly arrogant, so utterly blinded by their own localized social status, that they completely failed to understand the actual scale of the corporate battlefield we were standing on. They thought they were holding a gun to my head. In reality, they were bringing a wooden stick to a nuclear war. They honestly believed that their country club connections and internet followers could dismantle a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm. They did not realize that the editors William played golf with were owned by the media conglomerates my firm actively funded. They did not understand that the hospital directors William planned to call were the very same administrators currently begging my company for technological upgrades. They were painfully, hopelessly out of their depth. William stopped pacing and planted his feet firmly in front of me. He pointed his finger directly at my face again. So you have a choice to make right here and right now. William demanded, his voice dripping with venomous authority. You transfer the $15 million to my hospital operational account immediately. You draft the legal paperwork transferring 10% of your corporate equity to your sister as a wedding gift. And you publicly apologize to this family for your disrespectful behavior. If you do those things, we will protect your secret. We will let you keep your company. We will welcome you back into high society. But if you refuse, I will crush you so completely that you will be homeless in the snow all over again. I looked at William. I looked at Catherine. I looked at Ashley. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the heavy silence stretch across the luxurious bridal suite. I want to make sure I understand the terms of your proposal perfectly clearly, I said, keeping my voice meticulously calm and level. You are openly threatening to launch a coordinated fraudulent smear campaign against a federal healthcare contractor. You are threatening to leverage your medical board position to illegally interfere with my corporate patents and hospital contracts. And you are demanding a $15 million cash payment and hundreds of millions of dollars in equity to keep you from executing this malicious attack. Is that an accurate summary of your position, William? William puffed out his chest, his eyes gleaming with greedy triumph. He mistook my calm clarification for the beginning of my surrender. It is not a threat, Nicole Williams stated proudly. It is a promise. It is the cost of doing business in our world. You wanted to play with the big dogs, and now you are learning the price of admission. We hold all the cards. You have absolutely no leverage here. So yes, that is my final unyielding position. Pay up or lose everything you have spent the last 10 years building. Catherine smiled a cold, vicious smile. Make the smart choice, Nicole. You know your father never makes empty promises. Ashley tapped her manicured foot impatiently against the carpet. We are waiting, she snapped. I have a wedding to get back to, and you are wasting my valuable time. Do we have a deal, or do I need to start drafting my public statement? I held my designer clutch in my hands, feeling the hard rectangular edge of the legal folder hidden inside it. The sheer absolute audacity of their extortion attempt was the final nail in their coffin. They had just verbally confirmed their intent to commit corporate blackmail and financial extortion in a room with a closed door. They had handed me the exact justification I needed to completely obliterate them without a single ounce of lingering guilt. No, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that immediately wiped the triumphant smiles off their faces. We do not have a deal. William's face instantly flushed dark red. Excuse me, he barked, stepping forward aggressively. Did you just say no to me? I said no, I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. I am not giving you $15 million to cover up your gross financial incompetence. I am not giving Ashley a single share of my company, and I am certainly not apologizing to any of you. You stupid, arrogant little girl, William roared, raising his fist in the air. I will end you. I will pick up my phone right now and destroy your life. You are finished. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground and looked at the angry, pathetic man who had tormented me for my entire childhood. Go ahead, William, I said, gesturing toward his tuxedo pocket. Pick up your phone, call your journalist friends, call your medical board contacts, call every single person in your prestigious little network. But before you dial a single number, you might want to look at the documents I brought with me today. Because while you were busy planning a pathetic smear campaign, I was busy planning a corporate execution. I unsnapped the clasp of my clutch and reached inside my fingers, closing around the thick stack of federal documents that would permanently end the reign of my toxic family. I pulled the thick stack of federal documents from my bag and let them drop onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room, making all three of them jump slightly. I began to pace across the expensive Persian rug, my heels sinking into the plush fabric as I took complete control of the room. Let us talk about your liquidity issues. William, I began, keeping my gaze locked on his increasingly pale face. You stood here and tried to sell me a story about temporary cash flow problems and delayed insurance payouts. You framed it as a minor administrative hurdle that could be solved with a quick cash injection. But I do not deal in fabricated stories. I deal in hard data. And the data paints a very different picture of your prestigious medical facility. I continued pacing, making sure they were forced to turn their heads to follow me. I have been tracking your hospital's financial records for over 14 months. Did you honestly think a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm operates blindly? We have an entire division dedicated to analyzing failing medical institutions. We monitor market trends, patient turnover rates, and supply chain deficiencies. Your hospital popped up on our radar last year, not for its surgical excellence, but for its catastrophic financial hemorrhage. Your administrative team has been bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate, and no one in your inner circle had the courage to tell you. William tried to interject, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound emerged. I held up a hand to silence him before he could even try to defend himself. Your surgical wing is a financial sinkhole, I explained, my voice sharp and authoritative. You lost your two biggest regional contracts 8 months ago because your outdated equipment caused an unacceptable spike in post-operative complications. You refused to upgrade your systems because you were too arrogant to admit your traditional methods were failing. Instead of investing in new technology, you siphoned the operational budget to maintain your lavish lifestyle. You funded Catherine's country club galas. You paid for Ashley's luxury cars. You bled your own hospital dry to keep up the appearance of limitless wealth. Catherine gasped, clutching her throat. That is confidential information, she stammered, her voice trembling. You cannot possibly know that. I know everything, Catherine, I replied, stopping to look directly at her. I know that you refinanced your Beacon Hill estate twice in the last 3 years to cover your massive gambling losses. I know that William took out predatory high-interest loans from shadow lenders just to keep the payroll from bouncing every other Friday. You have been playing a dangerous game of financial roulette, and you finally lost the ultimate bet. Ashley looked between her parents, her wedding dress suddenly looking completely ridiculous in the face of absolute ruin. Mom, is she telling the truth? Ashley asked, her voice cracking with sudden panic. Dad, tell me she is lying. Tell me we are not broke. William could not look at his golden child. He stared at the documents on the glass table, his hands shaking visibly. He recognized the official federal seal stamped on the front page. Those are federal bankruptcy court documents, I said, breaking the silence. I want you to read the first page, William. I want you to see exactly what you are dealing with today. I hesitated, so I stepped forward and flipped the top page open for him. His eyes darted across the legal text, taking in the devastating reality. Last month, your primary creditor realized your hospital was a toxic asset. You defaulted on your $75 million commercial loan. The bank decided they no longer wanted the risk of associating with your sinking ship, so they quietly bundled your debt and put it up for private auction on Wall Street. William stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the velvet sofa and collapsing onto it. The arrogance had completely drained from his body, leaving an empty, terrified shell. You bought it, William whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. I did not just buy it, William, I said, standing tall over him. Apex Health Tech purchased your entire debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. We bought the mortgage on the hospital building. We bought the loans on your surgical equipment. We bought every single outstanding liability you possess. As of 48 hours ago, when the federal bankruptcy court approved the restructuring clause, my company became the absolute majority stakeholder of your facility. The magnitude of the revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Catherine let out a quiet sob, sinking onto the sofa next to her husband. Ashley backed away, pressing herself against the wall, as if trying to escape the truth. "You thought I came here today to ruin a wedding?" I asked, gesturing around the lavish bridal suite. "You thought I was a bitter, jealous sister coming to beg for an invitation to your high society party. You are completely delusional. I do not care about your wedding, Ashley. I do not care about your country club status, Catherine. And I certainly do not care about your approval, William." I picked up the federal documents and held them out to my father. "I did not come here to say hello. I came here to personally inspect my newly acquired assets. I own the hospital. I own the ground it sits on. I own the equipment you use. And as of this exact moment, I own you." William looked up at me, his eyes red and watery. "You cannot do this, Nicole. We are family. You cannot take my life's work." "You lost your life's work all by yourself," I corrected him coldly. "I just bought the wreckage. And unlike you, I actually know how to run a profitable medical facility. I know how to implement efficient software. I know how to manage resources without stealing from the operational budget. I am going to gut your failing institution and rebuild it into a modern, profitable center of excellence." Ashley rushed forward, grabbing my arm with trembling hands. "Nicole, please," she begged, completely abandoning her arrogant posture. "You have to give it back. If you own the hospital, then Dad has nothing. If Dad has nothing, my entire life is ruined. My friends will mock me. The medical society will banish us. You have to sell it back to us. We will find the money. We will figure it out." I looked down at her hands gripping my sleeve. I gently but firmly detached her fingers from my arm. "You cannot find $75 million, Ashley. You could not even afford this wedding without William committing financial fraud to pay for it." "Fraud!" William yelled, suddenly finding a burst of desperate energy. He jumped up from the sofa, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Buying dead is one thing, but you cannot accuse me of fraud. I am a respected surgeon. I have saved thousands of lives. You have no proof of any illegal activity. You are just trying to scare us." I smiled at him, a slow, calculated smile that made him instantly freeze. "You really think I would buy a massive failing hospital without conducting a complete forensic audit first, William? Do you honestly believe I would spend millions of dollars without turning over every single rock to see what was crawling underneath?" The last sliver of hope vanished from his face. He knew exactly what was hidden in his financial records. He knew what he had done to keep his illusion of wealth alive. I watched the realization wash over him, knowing that the next part of my plan would not just take his hospital, it would take his freedom. William collapsed back onto the velvet sofa, unable to tear his eyes away from the federal bankruptcy seal. The arrogant orthopedic surgeon was now visibly hyperventilating. "You cannot just buy a hospital," he stammered, lacking any former booming authority. "The board of directors has to approve a transition of majority ownership. We have extremely strict bylaws, Nicole. We have corporate protections in place against hostile takeovers. You are completely bluffing. This is a pathetic intimidation tactic." I stepped closer to the glass coffee table, tapping my manicured fingernail against the thick stack of legal documents. "There is no board of directors anymore, William. When a medical institution defaults on an $80 million commercial loan, the bank does not care about your petty internal bylaws. Sterling National Bank viewed your hospital as a catastrophic liability. They wanted the toxic debt off their balance sheets before the end of the fiscal quarter. So they held a private closed-door auction on Wall Street exclusively for elite venture capital firms." I crossed my arms, looking down at him with absolute clinical detachment. "Apex Health Tech was the highest bidder. Because your hospital was bleeding cash so rapidly, we acquired your $80 million debt for pennies on the dollar. We bought your entire legacy for the price of a generic corporate tax write-off." Ashley let out a sharp, frantic gasp. "Pennies on the dollar," she repeated, her voice trembling violently. She looked at her father, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "Dad, tell her she is lying. Tell her you still own the hospital. Tell her my trust fund is safe." William could not answer her. He was staring at the floor, his hands shaking so violently He had to interlock his fingers to steady them. He knew exactly how corporate bankruptcy functioned. He knew that when a primary creditor sells debt, the new buyer assumes all collateral rights. He knew his financial fortress was nothing more than a fragile house of cards that I had just effortlessly blown over. Catherine rushed forward, grabbing my arm with her perfectly manicured hands. "Nicole, please," Catherine begged, her voice dropping into a sickeningly desperate whine. "You have made your point. You are incredibly successful, and we are so very proud of you. But you do not have to do this. We can work together. You can take a seat on the board. We can rebrand the hospital together as a family. We can be partners and build an even greater legacy." I yanked my arm away from her grasping fingers, brushing my sleeve as if she had stained it with toxic waste. "We are not partners, Catherine," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the bridal suite. "I do not partner with failing executives, and I certainly do not partner with people who throw their children onto the street. You wanted a $15 million bailout. You thought you could extort me by threatening to call your journalist friends. But you have absolutely zero leverage because you have absolutely nothing left to your name." William slowly lifted his head, his face gray and completely drained of life. "You took every," he whispered, the reality of his total ruin finally breaking his arrogant spirit. "I took exactly what was legally up for sale," I corrected him sharply. "I simply capitalized on your own monumental incompetence. For 10 years you sat in your massive office thinking you were a god because you held a scalpel and shouted at nurses. You thought throwing me into the snow would permanently eliminate the only person in this family who refused to bow to your massive fragile ego. You vastly underestimated my capacity to rebuild." I walked around the coffee table, closing the final distance between us, until I was standing directly over him. I looked William dead in the eye, forcing him to meet the steady, unwavering gaze of the daughter he had brutally discarded. "As of exactly 48 hours ago, I am the undisputed majority stakeholder of your hospital," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "I hold 80% of the voting shares. The building you walk into every morning belongs to me. The operating rooms where you perform your surgeries belong to me. The corporate bank accounts you have been using as your personal piggy bank belong to me." Ashley let out a loud, sobbing wail, sinking onto the floor in her expensive custom wedding gown. Her perfect high society wedding day was actively disintegrating into a horrific financial nightmare, and she was completely powerless to stop it. "You do not get to make demands anymore." "William," I continued, refusing to break eye contact with my father. "You do not get to issue threats. You do not get to dictate terms. The power dynamic in this room shifted the exact second I walked through that door, and you were just too incredibly arrogant to see it. I am not your discarded daughter begging for scraps of approval. I am the chief executive officer of the company that literally owns your entire professional existence." William swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice completely broken, stripped of all its former tyrannical pride. "I want you to understand your new reality," I said, leaning down slightly so my words would echo clearly in his ears. "I want you to understand that the hospital no longer belongs to you. The prestigious medical legacy you built your entire identity around is completely gone. You are no longer the man in charge. You are my subordinate. I am your boss." The sudden sheer weight of those 4 precise words seemed to physically crush him. The great renowned surgeon was reduced to a trembling subordinate sitting on a velvet sofa. He had built his entire life on controlling others, and now he was entirely at the mercy of the woman he hated most. He had nowhere to run and absolutely no one to call for help. But I was not finished. The hostile takeover was merely the administrative prologue to my actual revenge. Acquiring the hospital was just the necessary mechanism to gain unrestricted access to his private files. I needed the ultimate legal authority to open his locked cabinets and bypass his loyal, corrupt administrators. I stood up straight, adjusting the emerald fabric of my dress with calm precision. "Now that we have firmly established who actually owns the hospital," I said, walking back over to my designer clutch, "we need to discuss exactly what my financial team found when we opened your books. Because poor financial management is a fireable offense, but what you have been doing in those operating rooms is a federal crime." I reached into the leather briefcase my assistant had left by the door and pulled out a massive, thickly bound document. The report was several inches thick, held together by heavy metal clasps, and stamped with the unmistakable seal of an elite independent financial forensics firm. I lifted it high enough for all of them to see the stark black lettering on the cover before dropping it onto the glass coffee table. The heavy thud caused the glass to rattle, vibrating through the silent room like a gavel striking a judge's block. "What is that?" William asked, his voice barely a whisper. That, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step around the table, is the complete, unredacted forensic audit of your hospital over the past 5 years. They went straight into your encrypted internal servers. They pulled every single billing record, every surgical log, and every expense report generated under your tenure as chief of surgery. We started noticing the discrepancies almost immediately. I continued, my voice sharp and unrelenting. But then my analysts started cross-referencing your surgical logs with the federal Medicare billing database. That is when we discovered the true depth of your sheer absolute depravity. Catherine let out a sharp gasp. "William, you told me the hospital was just going through a rough patch. You told me the insurance companies were just being difficult." "He lied to you, Catherine," I snapped, keeping my gaze locked on my father. "He lied to everyone." I tapped the cover of the audit report with my index finger. "Would you like to explain to your wife and daughter how you managed to bill the federal government for 73 complex orthopedic surgeries that never actually took place?" Ashley let out a choked sob. "Phantom surgeries," she whispered, staring at her father in absolute horror. "It was not like that." William scrambled to defend himself, his voice cracking with desperate panic. The hospital was drowning. The insurance payouts were taking months to process, and we had massive overhead costs. I had to keep the lights on. I had to pay the staff. I just coded some preliminary consultations as surgical procedures to expedite the cash flow. "No, William," I countered, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. "You falsified medical records. You claimed you implanted expensive titanium hardware into elderly patients who never went under the knife. You billed Medicare for millions of dollars in fraudulent claims. That is not an administrative workaround. That is a massive coordinated federal crime." "But your greed did not stop at federal fraud," I pressed on, refusing to give him a single second to breathe. "But you did not pay the staff. You did not upgrade the failing surgical equipment that was actively harming real patients. You funneled the stolen Medicare funds into a web of fake vendor shell companies." I flipped open the heavy report to a page marked with a bright red tab. "According to the forensic trace, these shell companies existed for one single purpose," I explained, outlining the highlighted numbers. "They were designed to wash the stolen hospital funds and funnel them directly into Catherine's private accounts. You siphoned millions of dollars from sick patients to fund your lavish high society lifestyle." Catherine backed away from the table, shaking her head in frantic denial. "No," she cried out, holding her hands up defensively. "You spent $200,000 on a diamond necklace, while the pediatric ward lacked basic sterile supplies." I fired back, my voice echoing fiercely off the walls. "You paid off your massive underground gambling debts using money meant for life-saving treatments. You bought luxury cars, custom designer wardrobes, and expensive country club memberships, all with stolen federal funds. You literally built your elite social status on the backs of defrauded taxpayers and neglected patients." Ashley fell to her knees, clutching her stomach as the horrifying reality fully washed over her. She looked at the gorgeous custom silk wedding dress she was wearing, realizing the sickening truth about how it was purchased. "My dress," Ashley sobbed, staring at the white fabric with pure disgust. "You paid for my wedding with stolen hospital money. Your entire perfect day is entirely funded by a criminal enterprise." William looked up from his hands, his face slick with sweat and tears. "Nicole, please," he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "You have the power to fix this. I will step down eventually. Just do not destroy the family name. We can keep this a secret." I looked at the man who had mercilessly thrown me into the freezing snow 10 years ago. He was offering me the exact same corrupt conditional loyalty he had weaponized against me my entire life. "I am not here to protect your secrets, William," I stated, my voice resonating with absolute undeniable finality. as the majority stakeholder of the hospital and the chief executive officer of its parent company. I am exercising my executive authority right here and right now. Your employment is officially terminated effectively immediately, I declared. You are fired from your position as chief of surgery for gross misconduct, embezzlement, and severe ethical violations. You are entirely stripped of your medical privileges within my hospital network. I am entirely serious. You cannot do this to me! William screamed, lunging forward slightly before collapsing back onto the sofa, defeated by his own lack of power. I built that hospital. I gave 30 years of my life to that institution. And you spent the last 5 years actively destroying it, I replied, crossing my arms. You are done, William. Your career is over. But losing your job is the absolute least of your concerns today. The heavy mahogany doors of the bridal suite suddenly rattled loudly, grabbing everyone's immediate attention. The intense conversation had completely consumed us, masking the approaching footsteps out in the long corridor. Someone else had been quietly listening to every single devastating word of this horrific confession from the dark hallway. The heavy mahogany doors rattled loudly in their frames, but the brass handle did not turn. A dark shadow shifted beneath the narrow gap at the bottom of the door, remaining perfectly still on the other side of the threshold. I knew exactly who was standing out there in the quiet hallway listening to this total family annihilation. But I ignored the shadowy figure for the time being. I had one final score to settle inside this bridal suite before the ultimate execution took place. I turned my complete and undivided attention away from my hyperventilating father and locked my gaze directly onto my younger sister. Ashley was actively suffocating under the crushing weight of her own shattered reality. Her chest heaved frantically against the tight constraints of her custom silk bodice. She kept looking down at the pristine white fabric of her gown, her hands trembling so violently that the expensive diamond bracelets on her wrists clinked together. The full, devastating context of her luxurious Hamptons wedding was finally catching up to her. Let us talk about your perfect fairy tale wedding, Ashley, I said, stepping away from the glass coffee table and moving deliberately into her personal space. Let us talk about the $250,000 that paid for this magnificent high society event. Ashley shook her head, backing away until her shoulder blades hit the ornate wallpaper. Nicole, please do not say it. She choked out her voice, a desperate, pathetic whisper. Please tell me you were just trying to scare Dad. Tell me my wedding is clean. I do not deal in comforting lies, Ashley. I replied, my voice sharp and entirely devoid of sympathy. I deal in hard, documented facts. And the facts show that every single luxurious detail of your special day is a direct product of federal theft. I began to walk in a slow, tight circle around her, examining the lavish details of her bridal attire. I read the vendor invoices, Ashley. I saw exactly how William routed the hospital funds to pay for your vanity project. The $50,000 catering bill for the imported caviar and vintage champagne. That was aggressively coded in the hospital accounting system as a mandatory continuing medical education conference for junior surgeons. The $30,000 spent on these extravagant floral archways and imported white roses. William authorized that expense by masking it as an emergency upgrade for the sterile environment protocols in the pediatric intensive care unit. Ashley's eyes rolled back slightly, her breathing growing dangerously shallow. She clutched her throat, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her own skin. And this stunning dress, I continued, gesturing to the heavy silk cascading around her trembling legs. This $12,000 masterpiece. Your father paid the elite designer, using a massive corporate account, specifically designated for acquiring life-saving surgical robotics. You are literally wearing stolen medical equipment, Ashley. You are draped in the stolen funds that were meant to save dying patients in your own family hospital. She let out a guttural, agonizing wail, covering her face with her shaking hands. It is not my fault, Ashley shrieked, her voice breaking with raw terror. I did not know. I swear to you, Nicole, I had absolutely no idea where the money was coming from. Dad just handed me a corporate credit card and told me to buy whatever I wanted. I am completely innocent. I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of her, forcing her to look at my cold, unforgiving expression. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when your own signature is on the fraudulent documents, Ashley, I stated, my tone dropping to a lethal, freezing whisper. Ashley's hands dropped from her face. Her entire body went completely rigid. What are you talking about? She gasped, her eyes wide with unadulterated panic. Did you really think the federal government cares about your wedding aesthetic? I asked, tilting my head slightly. You are a licensed practicing dermatologist, working directly under the hospital network umbrella. William could not authorize all those massive fake invoices completely by himself without triggering immediate red flags in the compliance department. He needed a secondary supervising physician to sign off on the massive corporate expenditures. I watched the devastating realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. I had you co-sign the vendor approvals, Ashley, I revealed, dealing the final crushing blow. You blindly signed dozens of electronic expense reports without ever reading them, because you were too obsessed with booking the perfect string quartet and securing the best photographer. Your digital signature is permanently attached to over $250,000 in deeply fraudulent Medicare theft. You are not just a broke, spoiled bride whose daddy lost his money. You are a fully complicit accessory to federal fraud. The last remaining shred of Ashley's arrogant high society facade completely imploded. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed entirely onto the plush carpet of the bridal suite, her heavy silk gown pooling around her in a messy, chaotic heap. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on me was now quite literally groveling at my feet. Nicole, please. Ashley sobbed uncontrollably, reaching out to grab the hem of my emerald dress. Please, you cannot let them take me away. I will lose my medical license. I will lose my entire career. My friends out there on the lawn will completely destroy me. I will be a total laughingstock in the medical community. I will be ruined. I looked down at her grasping hands, feeling a profound sense of absolute disgust. Even now, staring down the barrel of federal prison, she only cared about her social standing. You own the hospital now, Ashley pleaded, looking up at me with pathetic, desperate eyes. You have the audit report. You can just delete my name from the files. You can cover it up, Nicole. You are a billionaire. You can make the massive debt disappear quietly. Please do this for me. I will be the best sister in the world. I will publicly apologize to you. I will tell everyone how brilliant you are. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not let me lose my reputation. I gently but firmly kicked my leg back, pulling the fabric of my dress entirely out of her desperate grip. Your reputation is already dead, Ashley, I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality. You built your entire identity on a mountain of toxic lies and stolen money. You gladly watched William throw me into the freezing snow because it meant you got to keep the spotlight all to yourself. You spent the last decade mocking my existence. You do not get to beg for my protection just because the consequences of your own disgusting greed have finally caught up with you. Ashley buried her face in the carpet, wailing so loudly the sound vibrated through the floorboards. Catherine rushed over to her golden child, falling to her knees to wrap her arms around Ashley's shaking shoulders. They knelt there together, a pathetic portrait of ruined vanity, crying over their lost social status, while completely ignoring the horrific crimes they had committed against innocent patients. I stood above them, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute justice. I had dismantled every single lie they had ever told. I had stripped them of their stolen wealth, their unearned prestige, and their toxic power. The complete annihilation of my family was fundamentally finished. But the absolute final judgment was not going to come from me. The heavy brass handle of the mahogany door finally turned with a loud, decisive click. The door swung slowly inward, revealing the tall, imposing figure who had been quietly listening to the entire horrific extortion attempt and the devastating fraud confession from the dark hallway. The groom was finally ready to deliver his verdict. Andre stood perfectly framed in the grand doorway of the bridal suite. The polished brass handle released from his grip with a sharp metallic snap that sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence of the room. He wore his custom black tuxedo, but the joyful groom who had been greeting elite guests on the manicured lawn just 20 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place stood a man radiating an icy, terrifying calm. His dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the pathetic scene before him. He looked at William collapsed on the velvet sofa, sweating and ruined. He looked at Catherine kneeling on the carpet with her face buried in her hands, and finally he looked at his bride. Ashley was still sprawled on the floor, tangled in her expensive stolen silk gown. When she saw Andre standing there, a sudden flash of desperate hope ignited in her tear-stained eyes. She thought her savior had arrived. She thought the brilliant neurosurgeon who loved her would march into the room, put a protective arm around her, and banish the evil sister who was destroying her perfect day. Andre Ashley cried out, her voice cracking as she scrambled to her feet. She stumbled over the heavy fabric of her dress, rushing across the room with her arms outstretched. Andre, thank God you are here. You have to help us. Nicole has gone completely insane. She is trying to steal Dad's hospital. She is making up these horrible, disgusting lies about Medicare fraud and stolen money. You have to stop her, baby. Ashley threw herself at him, aiming for his chest, just as she had done out in the garden. But Andre did not catch her. He did not wrap his arms around her. He stepped sharply to the side, letting her momentum carry her forward, until she stumbled awkwardly, catching herself on the doorframe. "Do not touch me," Andre said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a lethal, freezing weight that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. Ashley froze, her hands hovering in the air. "Andre, what is wrong?" "It is me. It is Ashley." "I know exactly who you are," Andre replied, his dark eyes burning with absolute revulsion. "I have been standing in that hallway for the last 15 minutes. I heard the entire conversation. I heard William demand $15 million. I heard you demand a 10% equity stake in a multi-billion-dollar company simply because your feelings were hurt. And I heard the very detailed, irrefutable evidence of a massive, coordinated federal fraud taking place at the exact hospital where I practice medicine." William's head snapped up from the sofa. "Andre-san, please listen to me. You do not understand the administrative pressure of running a massive medical facility. We can handle this privately." "I am not your son!" William Andre barked, his voice finally rising with unchecked righteous fury. "And I understand perfectly. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit. I watched people in my community die from preventable diseases because they could not afford basic medical care. I took out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans and worked grueling double shifts to become a neurosurgeon so I could save lives. And you sit in your pristine corner office and bill the federal government for phantom surgeries. You steal money from dying patients to buy your wife diamond necklaces and fund this obscene display of wealth in the Hamptons. You sicken me." Catherine let out a loud, sobbing wail, but Andre completely ignored her, turning his furious gaze back to the woman he was supposed to marry. "And you?" Andre said, staring at Ashley as if she were an alien species. "You actually signed the fraudulent vendor approvals. You funded this entire wedding with stolen medical equipment money." "I did not know," Ashley shrieked, fresh tears streaming down her panicked face. "I swear to you, Andre, I did not read the documents. Dad just told me to sign them. I am innocent. You have to believe me. We are getting married today. We love each other." Then Ashley did something so incredibly audacious, so completely detached from reality, that I actually had to brace myself against the glass coffee table just to watch it unfold. "You can fix this," Andre Ashley begged, grabbing the lapels of his expensive tuxedo jacket. "You have the $25 million research grant. The anonymous grant that saved your oncology project. You just found out it came from Nicole. She gave you the money. You can use it to save us." Andre stared at her, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing into furious slits. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ashley?" "Use the grant money," Ashley pleaded, her voice rising in a frantic, desperate pitch. "Give the $25 million back to Nicole to buy the hospital debt. You can buy Dad's loans. You can cover the missing Medicare funds. If you pay her off, she will drop the audit. She will not go to the FBI. We can keep the hospital in the family. We can walk out to the garden right now, get married, and live our perfect life. You have the power to make this all go away." The sheer, unadulterated delusion of her request hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She was standing in front of a brilliant, dedicated neurosurgeon, a man who had dedicated his entire existence to fighting aggressive brain tumors, and she was explicitly begging him to misappropriate his life-saving research funds to bail out her corrupt family. I watched Andre look at the woman he had loved. I watched the final shred of his affection for her completely disintegrate into ash. You want me to take $25 million? Andre asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying dead calm. You want me to take the exact funding that is currently building robotic surgical arms for stage 4 cancer patients. You want me to strip the funding away from clinical trials that are actively keeping dying children alive. You want me to steal from my own terminal patients so I can hand the cash over to your fraudulent father to cover up his federal crimes. It is just money, Ashley cried, shaking his jacket. We are your family. Family comes first. You can always get another grant later. But if you do not do this, my father goes to federal prison and I lose everything. Andre forcefully grabbed Ashley's wrists and physically removed her hands from his tuxedo. He pushed her back, sending her stumbling into the center of the room. It is not just money, Ashley Andre roared, his voice vibrating with absolute raw power. It is survival. It is medical innovation. It is the literal difference between life and death for people who do not have the privilege of throwing catered parties in the Hamptons. You actually think your social standing is more important than curing neurological tumors. You think your custom silk dress and your country club reputation are worth sacrificing innocent lives. Ashley covered her face, sobbing hysterically, recognizing that her ultimate manipulation tactic had catastrophically failed. I thought you were a healer, Andre continued, shaking his head in profound, utter disgust. I thought you became a dermatologist because you cared about helping people. But you are just a parasite. You are exactly like your father. You view the medical profession as a personal cash machine designed to fund your vanity. You look down on your sister for working in tech, calling her a failure, while she is actively building the infrastructure that keeps this industry alive. She is 10 times the woman you will ever be. Andre took a step backward, putting physical and emotional distance between himself and the toxic wreckage of my family. He adjusted his jacket cuffs, his breathing heavy but controlled. His eyes swept over William cowering on the sofa, Catherine weeping on the floor, and Ashley hyperventilating in her stolen wedding gown. I refuse to use a single cent of my clinical funding to bail out a family of narcissistic fraudsters, Andre declared, his voice ringing with absolute unwavering finality. I refuse to compromise my medical ethics, my integrity, or my soul to protect your pathetic, fraudulent legacy. You dug this massive grave all by yourselves. Now you get to lie in it. The silence in the bridal suite following Andre's declaration was absolute and crushing. Ashley stared up at the man she was supposed to marry, her face a twisted mask of running mascara and profound despair. She reached out one trembling hand toward him, but the sheer revulsion in his dark eyes made her pull it back. You disgust me, Andre said, his voice devoid of any lingering affection. I look at you now and I do not see the woman I fell in love with. I see a hollow, greedy shell. You are a parasite, Ashley. You feed on the suffering of others to maintain an illusion of superiority, and you expected me to abandon my life-saving research to join your pathetic charade. I would rather lose my medical license than marry into a lineage of arrogant thieves and narcissistic frauds. He reached up to the lapel of his custom tuxedo jacket. With a swift, sharp motion, he ripped the expensive white rose boutonniere from the fabric. The delicate petals crushed under his strong fingers as he threw the ruined flower directly onto the plush carpet at Ashley's feet. The wedding is completely off, Andre stated, his tone carrying a lethal finalizing authority. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. Do not call my office. Do not approach me at the hospital. If I ever see you or your fraudulent parents near my research facility, I will personally have you escorted out by federal security. Andre turned on his heel, his polished dress shoes, stepping right over the crushed white rose. He did not spare a single backward glance for William, who was still weeping into his hands on the velvet sofa, or Catherine, who was paralyzed by sheer terror against the floral wallpaper. He strode toward the heavy mahogany doors, gripping the brass handle and pulling it open with a forceful yank. I watched him go, feeling a deep sense of immense professional respect for the neurosurgeon. He possessed a rare, unyielding integrity that my toxic family entirely lacked. I picked up my designer clutch, smoothing the emerald fabric of my dress, and calmly followed his path out of the suffocating bridal suite. I wanted a front row seat to the magnificent public execution of my family's prestigious social standing. The contrast between the dark, tense atmosphere of the bridal suite and the bright, lively environment of the Hamptons estate was incredibly jarring. Outside on the sprawling, manicured lawn, hundreds of elite guests were laughing, clinking crystal champagne glasses, and discussing their lucrative medical practices. Waiters continued to weave through the affluent crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with gourmet appetizers. The string quartet was playing a cheerful, uplifting classical symphony, completely oblivious to the massive storm about to strike the garden. Andre did not hesitate. He marched across the stone terrace, his broad shoulders set in a rigid, unyielding line. His long, purposeful strides cut directly through the sea of high society guests. People naturally parted ways for the handsome, imposing groom, offering polite smiles and raising their glasses in premature celebration. Andre ignored every single one of them. His gaze was locked entirely on the large outdoor entertainment setup, positioned near the massive floral archway. I stood near the edge of the stone terrace watching the scene unfold with absolute cold detachment. The sheer anticipation buzzing in my chest was exhilarating. Andre reached the DJ booth, stepping aggressively behind the long table, covered in expensive audio equipment. The hired DJ, a young man in a sharp vest, looked up in surprise as the groom bypassed the usual pleasantries. Andre reached over the soundboard and firmly grabbed the main microphone. He did not ask for permission. He simply reached down and forcefully unplugged the audio cable connecting the string quartet's amplifier to the main speaker system. The soft, cheerful classical music abruptly cut off with a loud, jarring scratch of static. The sudden, heavy silence immediately captured the attention of every single person on the manicured lawn. Hundreds of heads turned simultaneously toward the floral archway. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. The elite crowd of prominent surgeons, hospital board members, and wealthy politicians stared at the groom, expecting a heartwarming impromptu speech or a romantic toast to his beautiful bride. Andre stood tall behind the DJ booth, gripping the microphone tightly in his right hand. He looked out over the sea of expectant faces, his expression remarkably stern and uncompromising. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andre began, his deep, resonant voice booming through the massive outdoor speakers and echoing across the entire private estate. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to your afternoon. I appreciate all of you traveling here today to celebrate what was supposed to be the beginning of my marriage." A soft, polite murmur of anticipation rippled through the wealthy crowd. A few people smiled warmly, waiting for the punchline of a charming romantic joke. However, Andre continued his tone, dropping into a cold, deadly serious register that instantly wiped the smiles off their faces. "I must inform you that there will be no wedding ceremony taking place today. The marriage is permanently cancelled effectively immediately." A loud collective gasp erupted from the hundreds of guests. People exchanged wide-eyed, shocked glances. The silence that followed his declaration was so profoundly tense you could hear the ocean waves crashing against the distant shoreline. "I cannot in good conscience proceed with this union," Andre announced, his voice slicing through the thick, heavy air without a single tremor of hesitation. "Over the past hour, I have been made aware of severe, deeply disturbing ethical and financial misconduct committed by the bride and her immediate family. The individuals hosting this event have engaged in massive coordinated fraud directly impacting the hospital network many of you are affiliated with." The crowd erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked whispers and loud exclamations. Prominent medical directors grabbed their spouses' arms in utter disbelief. Rival surgeons exchanged calculating, knowing looks, realizing a massive power vacuum was about to open in their prestigious social circle. "They have actively stolen funds meant for critical patient care and life-saving surgical equipment," Andre declared, projecting his voice over the rising panic of the crowd. "They have deliberately falsified federal medical records to maintain their lavish lifestyle. They have used stolen Medicare money to fund the very caviar you are eating and the champagne you are drinking." As a medical professional who has dedicated his entire life to preserving human health, I find their actions utterly reprehensible and absolutely disgusting. I refuse to associate my name, my career, or my future with a family of corrupt, parasitic fraudsters. He paused, letting the sheer devastating weight of his words sink into the minds of the elite attendees. The social destruction of William and Catherine was now entirely irreversible. Their pristine golden reputation was actively burning to the ground in front of the exact people they desperately needed to impress. "Please set down your drinks," Andre instructed, his tone reverting to the calm, authoritative command of a lead surgeon in an operating room. "The catering staff is dismissed. I urge all of you to safely locate your vehicles and exit the premises immediately. Thank you for your time. Have a safe drive home." Andre reached over and clicked the microphone off, setting it carefully down on the audio table. He did not wait for the ensuing explosion of frantic questions. He simply turned around and began walking away from the floral archway, leaving the stunned, murmuring crowd behind him. The execution was flawless. I stood on the stone terrace watching the elite society completely dissolve into utter pandemonium. Wealthy guests were abandoning their half-full champagne glasses on the manicured grass, pulling out their mobile phones to frantically text their colleagues about the massive scandal. The carefully constructed high society facade of my toxic family was completely obliterated, permanently reduced to ash by the very man they had tried to manipulate. The stage was now perfectly set for the final devastating act of my long-awaited revenge. The stage was now perfectly set for the final devastating act of my long-awaited revenge. The manicured lawn of the Hamptons estate had transformed into a scene of absolute hysterical chaos. Wealthy surgeons and powerful hospital board members scrambled frantically toward the exit, trampling over the expensive floral arrangements and dropping crystal champagne glasses onto the grass. The sheer desperation to distance themselves from a massive financial scandal turned the elite high society gathering into a panicked stampede. Valet drivers were completely overwhelmed as guests shouted demands for their luxury vehicles, tossing crumpled cash just to escape the property faster. I stood on the elevated stone terrace, completely unbothered by the frantic energy swirling below me. I watched the exodus with a calm, steady gaze. Then a new sound pierced through the loud, chaotic chatter of the fleeing crowd. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail echoing down the coastal highway. Within seconds, the sound amplified, growing rapidly louder and more aggressive. Sirens. The remaining guests froze in their tracks, turning their heads toward the main entrance. 3 massive black sport utility vehicles with dark-tinted windows and federal government license plates tore through the open wrought iron gates. Their heavy tires aggressively crushed the pristine gravel driveway, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. Bright red and blue lights flashed violently from their windshields, casting harsh, rhythmic shadows across the elegant white wedding tents. The vehicles screeched to a halt directly in front of the main mansion. Doors flew open simultaneously. A dozen federal agents poured out, moving with intense, coordinated precision. They wore dark tactical vests emblazoned with bold yellow letters reading FBI across the back. This was the exact response I had anticipated. At precisely 8 o'clock that morning, I had instructed my corporate legal team to forward the completely unredacted forensic audit report directly to the Office of the Inspector General and the federal authorities. The comprehensive evidence of massive Medicare fraud and blatant embezzlement was entirely undeniable, and the federal response was perfectly swift. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern, uncompromising expression, strode purposefully up the stone steps toward the terrace. He bypassed the terrified catering staff and the remaining frozen guests, flashing his official badge. He locked eyes with me, instantly recognizing my face from the corporate profile attached to the whistleblower submission. "Ms. Mitchell," the lead agent asked, his voice crisp and professional. "I am Agent Reynolds. We are looking for William. Can you direct us to his current location?" I offered him a polite professional nod. "He is in the private bridal suite located down the main hall to the left. I will gladly show you the way." I turned and walked back into the opulent mansion, the heavy footsteps of multiple armed federal agents echoing loudly against the marble floors right behind me. We marched down the grand corridor, moving as an unstoppable force of absolute justice. When we reached the heavy mahogany doors of the bridal suite, the lead agent did not bother knocking. He grabbed the brass handle and shoved the doors wide open with a forceful bang that shook the expensive picture frames hanging on the walls. The scene inside the room was a portrait of total, pathetic devastation. William was still sitting heavily on the velvet sofa, looking exactly like a deflated balloon. His custom tuxedo jacket was wrinkled and thrown aside, his silk tie hanging loosely around his neck. Catherine was pacing frantically in circles, biting her perfectly manicured nails, while Ashley remained completely paralyzed on the floor. William, the lead agent, announced, his voice commanding absolute authority in the confined space. "You are under arrest for severe violations of federal law, including massive Medicare fraud, gross embezzlement, and coordinated conspiracy to defraud the federal government." William did not fight back. He did not puff out his chest or attempt to use his arrogant, authoritative surgeon voice to intimidate the agents. The fight had been completely and entirely drained from his body. He slowly lifted his head, looking at the federal agents with totally hollow, dead eyes. He slowly pushed himself off the velvet sofa and held his trembling wrists out in front of him. The cold, harsh metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs, snapping tightly around his wrists, echoed violently through the quiet bridal suite. It was the absolute sound of a tyrannical empire permanently collapsing into dust. Catherine let out a guttural, breathless shriek. She watched her husband being physically restrained like a common street criminal. The flawless high society life she had spent decades ruthlessly constructing was entirely eradicated in front of her eyes. She collapsed heavily onto her knees, clutching the edge of the velvet sofa for support. She let out loud, ugly, heaving sobs, completely destroying her pristine makeup. She knew her elite country club friends were standing right outside on the lawn, actively watching the FBI raid her daughter's wedding. She was entirely socially ruined, utterly financially destitute, and completely alone. Ashley was hyperventilating on the floor. The terrifying reality that her own digital signature was permanently attached to the fraudulent vendor documents sent her into a violent panic attack. She grabbed the heavy, expensive fabric of her custom silk wedding dress and began to tear at it. She ripped the delicate imported lace, shredding the beautiful garment that had been purchased with stolen federal medical funds. She screamed into the plush carpet, destroying her perfect bridal aesthetic with her own frantic, clawing hands. "Nicole, please," Ashley gasped, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Tell them I had absolutely no idea. Tell them I just signed what Dad told me to sign. Please do not let them put me in a federal prison. I am a doctor. I have a perfect life." I looked down at the golden child who had mocked my very existence just an hour ago. I offered her absolutely no comfort and no promises. "You are an adult, Ashley," I replied coldly. "You can explain your perfect life to the federal judge." The agents grabbed William by the arms, turning him around to face the hallway. I stepped aside, allowing them a clear path to the exit. William looked at me one final time as he shuffled past. There was no rage left in his expression, just a profound, empty realization of his monumental failure. He had thrown away a daughter who could have easily elevated his legacy, and instead he had chosen a path of greedy destruction that ultimately guaranteed his total imprisonment. I followed the agents out of the bridal suite, walking a few paces behind them. We moved down the grand hallway and out through the massive front doors of the Hamptons estate. The remaining elite guests had their mobile phones out, actively recording the highly respected chief of surgery being paraded across the gravel driveway in federal handcuffs. The mighty, arrogant tyrant was publicly reduced to a pathetic viral spectacle of sheer disgrace. The agents securely placed William into the back of the dark SUV and slammed the heavy door shut. The federal vehicles engaged their sirens once again, pulling away from the pristine estate and disappearing down the long, winding coastal road. I stood on the front steps of the mansion, breathing in the warm ocean air. The toxic dark cloud that had hovered over my entire life for 32 years had finally completely dissipated. The execution was flawless. The retribution was absolute. My family was destroyed by their own undeniable greed, and I had not needed to raise my voice even once to make it happen. I adjusted the strap of my designer bag, preparing to leave this toxic wasteland behind me forever. I adjusted the strap of my designer bag, preparing to leave this toxic wasteland behind me forever. Walking down the wide stone steps of the estate, I felt a profound lightness in my chest. The chaotic energy that had consumed the manicured lawns just an hour prior had completely settled into a strange, hollow quiet. The elite guests had completely scattered, leaving behind overturned chairs, abandoned champagne flutes, and a shattered illusion of high society prestige. The string quartet had packed their instruments and fled. The catering staff moved silently across the grass, rapidly clearing away the expensive remnants of a fraudulent celebration. It looked exactly like the aftermath of a massive, destructive storm. And in every sense of the word, it truly was. As I reached the edge of the long, circular driveway, I saw my black luxury sedan waiting smoothly idling near the front gates. My driver stood respectfully beside the open rear door. But before I could cross the final stretch of gravel, a deep, familiar voice called out my name. I turned to see Andre walking purposefully down the sweeping driveway toward me. He had removed his formal tuxedo jacket, holding it casually over one shoulder. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his collar. The immense heavy stress that had visibly weighed him down inside the bridal suite had completely lifted from his broad shoulders. He looked like a man who had just narrowly escaped a lifetime prison sentence. Andre stopped a few feet away from me. There was absolutely no romantic tension between us. This was not a fairy tale ending where two people run off into the sunset together. This was a moment of profound mutual recognition. We were two aggressive, driven professionals who had built our entire lives from the absolute bottom up. We had both faced systemic rejection. We had both been underestimated by the arrogant elites of the medical world. And we had both refused to let their toxic entitlement dictate our futures. We shared the unique, silent understanding of people who know exactly what it takes to survive and conquer. "Thank you, Nicole," Andre said, his voice carrying a deep, resonant sincerity. "I mean that from the bottom of my heart. You did not just save my medical research today. You saved my entire life. If you had not shown up and exposed the absolute truth, I would have legally tied myself to a family of parasitic criminals. I would have spent the rest of my career carrying the massive weight of their endless fraud. You gave me back my future." I extended my hand, offering him a firm, professional handshake. "You earned your future, Andre," I replied, meeting his intense gaze. "I only provided the capital because your brilliant mind provided the cure. Your research is going to save thousands of innocent lives. Do not let the pathetic actions of William and Ashley distract you from your true purpose. My corporate board is eagerly looking forward to your clinical trial presentation next month. Your $25 million funding is absolutely secure. We have a lot of work to do." Andre smiled, a genuine, relieved expression that completely transformed his face. "I will see you next month, boss," he said, stepping back to let me pass. I offered him one final nod of respect before turning and sliding into the plush leather back seat of my waiting sedan. My driver gently closed the heavy door, sealing me inside the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of the vehicle. As the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, I settled back into the comfortable seat and let out a long, slow breath. I turned my head to look out the tinted rear window, watching the massive Hamptons estate gradually shrink into the distance. Far down the winding coastal highway, I could still see the faint rhythmic flashes of red and blue police lights reflecting against the darkening evening sky. 10 years ago, I walked away from my family into a blinding, freezing blizzard. I had no money, no shelter, and no idea how I was going to survive the night. My father had thrown me away like garbage because I refused to be a compliant trophy. My mother had coldly watched me suffer because her social status mattered more than her own child. My sister had smiled at my destruction because it guaranteed her position as the undisputed golden child. They had stripped me of everything, hoping I would crawl back and beg for their toxic mercy. But as I watched those police lights fade into the horizon, I realized the most important lesson of my entire life. True family is never determined by shared genetics or a common last name. Blood simply makes you related. True family is built entirely on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine unconditional love. It is found in the people who stand by you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them. It is found in the mentors who see your potential when others call you a failure. It is found in the business partners who help you build an empire from the ground up. I had spent my youth desperately craving validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. I learned that the absolute best revenge against toxic abusers is never found in screaming matches or violent physical confrontations. You do not win by sinking to their desperate, pathetic level. You win by ascending to a height they cannot possibly reach. The greatest revenge is unbothered monumental success. It is building a life so incredibly vast and powerful that their petty cruelties bounce off you like rain against a fortress. My family tried to bury me in the snow. They did not realize I was a seed, and from that frozen ground I grew an untouchable empire. They had dug their own graves with their boundless greed, and I had simply provided the headstone.